We all know that the words of Jesus have changed countless lives, from kings who ruled empires to prisoners who had nothing but hope. But have you ever wondered why his teachings still touch hearts thousands of years later? What makes his voice calm storms within us, just as it calmed the sea? In today's video, we'll talk about how his lessons begin with stillness and listening. So let's not waste any time, and let's begin. The morning rests in golden hush. The forest breathes slow, each leaf catching light like a promise. Beneath the broad branches, the teacher sits where the earth bends into a soft hollow. Around him, people arrive one by one. Fishermen with rough hands, mothers with tired eyes, the old and the young, all carrying something unseen within them. They do not speak at first. They only stand, waiting, watching, letting the quiet wash over them. The sound of the wind through the trees feels like breath shared between heaven and earth. The teacher looks up from his scroll, his gaze tender yet piercing, as though seeing through every worry they've carried to this place. Peace does not shout, he says. It waits for the heart to listen. His words do not fall heavy, but light, like the touch of falling leaves. Some close their eyes as if to better hear. Others shift uneasily, unaccustomed to such stillness. The teacher lets the silence linger. It is in that silence, they realize, that the world begins to open. He motions to the ground around him, and they sit, forming a circle that mirrors the fallen leaves. Many come seeking answers, he says. Few come ready to listen. His voice carries easily, though it never rises above the breeze. Listening is the first act of love, for in listening, you lay down your pride and make room for another's truth. A young man near the front lowers his eyes. He has come with questions burning in his chest, questions of pain, injustice, and fear. But the teacher does not call for words. He simply gestures to the rhythm of the wind and says, "Even the trees speak if you are still enough to hear them." The crowd remains silent, uncertain. Somewhere, a child laughs softly, chasing a drifting leaf. The teacher smiles. "See," he says, "even the smallest heart understands peace." He opens the scroll upon his lap, but does not yet read. Before we learn from written words, he says, we must learn from the quiet between them. His fingers trace the text like one who knows each line by heart. Stillness is not the absence of sound, it is the space where meaning lives. A woman lifts her hand, hesitant. "Teacher," she asks, "how can one be still when life is filled with noise? The city never sleeps. The heart never stops aching." The teacher nods, the corner of his mouth soft with knowing. "Stillness," he says, "is not found in the silence of the world, but in the peace within the soul. You can stand in the marketplace and still hear the whisper of God. The noise outside cannot drown the voice inside, unless you let it." He pauses and looks toward the sun as it filters through the amber canopy. "When the world is loud," he continues, "go where the heart grows quiet. Sometimes that place is not far, it is only a breath away." A hush settles again. The crowd's breathing seems to slow in rhythm with his words. He begins to speak of understanding, not as knowledge to be collected, but as wisdom to be lived. "You cannot understand the world by controlling it," he says, "only by listening to it. The river does not teach by shouting. The stars do not argue with the dark. Yet all creation reveals truth to those who wait." A breeze moves through the trees, scattering a handful of leaves into the air. The teacher watches them fall and gestures gently. "See how they do not cling? Each one knows when it is time to let go. So too must the soul release what it holds too tightly, its worries, its judgments, its pride. When you let go, you make room for peace to dwell." His words hang there, simple yet infinite. The disciples look at each other, some with eyes wet from quiet conviction. The teacher rises, his robe brushing against the fallen leaves. He walks a few steps forward, the crowd instinctively following. His every movement feels deliberate, filled with meaning. He stops by a young fig tree, its roots half buried in the earth. Kneeling beside it, he places his hand upon the soil. "Everything that grows," he says, "first learns to listen." The disciples lean closer. The tree listens to the rain, the soil listens to the sky, the heart must listen to the truth, and when it does, It bears fruit. He looks up, eyes bright in the dappled light. But if the soil is hard, he continues, pressing the ground gently with his palm, the seed cannot take root. So it is with the heart. When you close yourself in pride or anger, nothing good can grow there. The soil of the heart must be soft, ready to receive, ready to change. The people nod, understanding flickering in their faces like sunlight through leaves. The teacher stands again, brushing the dust from his hands. The garden of the soul begins with stillness, he says softly, but it grows through humility. The wind shifts. A leaf drifts down, landing upon the teacher's shoulder. He does not brush it away. Instead, he looks at it as though it too were part of the lesson. Even the smallest thing can teach, he whispers. The people remain seated, hearts stirred but calm, feeling as though they have just witnessed the world exhale. Above them, the trees hum faintly in the wind, the soft percussion of creation itself. The teacher turns back toward the fig tree, the sunlight tracing the edges of his form like a halo of warmth and gold. And as the crowd sits in wonder, he begins to speak again, this time not of stillness, but of the heart itself, and how it must be tended like living soil, ready for the seed of heaven to be sown. The morning sun stretched across the garden, warm and golden, touching every branch, every face that gathered beneath the trees. The teacher sat where the earth was soft and open, a patch of freshly turned soil beside him. His hand reached down, fingers sifting through the dirt as though feeling the pulse of life hidden underneath. The heart, he began quietly, is like the earth beneath us. It holds potential for every seed, but not every heart is ready to grow what is planted. The people leaned closer, their eyes following his hand as he lifted a handful of soil and let it fall through his fingers. The dust caught the light, scattering like tiny stars before fading into the ground again. There was once a farmer, the teacher continued, who went out to sow his seed. Some fell upon the path, hard and trampled, where the birds came and took it away. Some fell upon rocky ground, where it sprouted quickly but soon withered under the sun because it had no roots. Some fell among thorns, and though it began to grow, the thorns choked it until it bore no fruit. But some— He paused, his eyes sweeping across the quiet crowd. Some fell on good soil, and it yielded fruit, 30, 60, even 100-fold. A fisherman sitting near the front tilted his head. "Teacher," he asked softly, "how can a heart become like good soil?" The teacher smiled, pressing his palm to the ground. The soil of the heart must be tended. It cannot be left wild, for weeds will grow on their own. Pride, anger, envy, these are the thorns. Bitterness, fear, these are the rocks. They harden the ground and steal the life from what is good. He stood and walked a few steps toward a young fig tree growing at the garden's edge. "When the rains come," he said, "they cannot soak into hard earth. They run off, wasted. So it is with grace. It flows where hearts are soft, but the hardened heart lets it pass by." A woman near the back lowered her head, tears glinting in her eyes. The teacher's words seemed to touch something buried deep within her. She had carried years of resentment, packed down and hidden, yet heavy as stone. The teacher turned his gaze toward her, not in accusation, but understanding, and said, "Sometimes the heart must be broken before it can be healed. The cracks allow the rain to enter." The garden grew silent again, the kind of silence that holds more meaning than speech. A few leaves fell, spiraling through the sunlight. The teacher knelt once more and began to dig a shallow hole with his hands. He placed a seed inside and covered it gently. "The seed does not demand to grow," he said. "It waits in darkness until it is called by light, but it cannot rise unless it first dies to itself beneath the soil. So too must the heart yield, let go of its hardness, its stubbornness, its need to control. Only then can peace take root." One of the younger men frowned. "But Master," he said, "what if the heart has been trampled for so long that it feels nothing? What if the soil is dry and lifeless?" The teacher looked toward him with compassion. "Even the desert blooms when the rain comes," he answered. "No heart is beyond the touch of heaven, but the rain cannot fall if one hides beneath the roof of pride. You must open your soul to the sky." He looked upward, and everyone followed his gaze. The sun had risen higher, scattering light like divine fire across the canopy. The teacher's voice grew softer, like a lullaby for the weary. "Tending the heart is not a task for one day. You must wake each morning and pull the weeds before they grow deep. You must water it with prayer, warm it with faith, and guard it from the storms of bitterness. For every heart, like every field, bears what it welcomes. He brushed the dirt from his hands, and a faint smile crossed his face. Some will hear these words and say, "Yes, I will change," but never lift a hand to till their soil. Others will begin, and when the work grows hard, they will stop. But those who remain, those who keep digging, keep softening, keep waiting, will see their fields come alive. The people sat quietly, many tracing shapes in the dirt beside them, as if suddenly aware of what their own hearts might hold. The teacher watched them, then said, "Look to your hearts as I look to this ground. What grows there? What roots have you let remain, though they choke your peace?" He pointed toward the newly planted seed. "This little one will grow if the earth stays soft. You cannot force it with impatience, nor abandon it with neglect. Care for your heart as the gardener cares for his field, daily, gently, faithfully." The teacher's voice lingered, warm as the light around him. A quiet strength flowed from his words, and it seemed the air itself carried their weight. The people could feel it, something unseen beginning to stir inside, a movement like roots seeking water. The teacher stepped back beneath the autumn tree. "One day," he said, "you will see what has grown from every seed I've given you. But before that day comes, remember, no soil remains soft without forgiveness. Bitterness hardens it again. To keep your peace, you must learn to forgive." He let the words settle in the silence, then closed his eyes for a moment as the wind moved gently through the garden. A single leaf drifted down, landing upon the soil he had just touched. And in that stillness, the people knew he was about to teach them not only how to plant, but how to cleanse the ground of every root that once strangled their peace. The sky had shifted to a deeper gold by the time the teacher spoke again. The light shimmered through the canopy, touching every leaf with warmth that seemed to come not just from the sun, but from something eternal. The people sat quietly, their hearts softened like soil after the rain. The teacher unrolled a small piece of parchment and read in a voice that carried both weight and gentleness. "Blessed are the merciful," he read, "for they will be shown mercy." He looked up, scanning the faces before him. "Mercy," he said softly, "is not weakness. It is strength in silence, grace in motion, peace made visible." He paused, allowing the words to settle. "And forgiveness," he continued, "is the rain that keeps the heart alive." The crowd leaned closer, the rustle of leaves almost like a whisper of agreement. "Forgiveness," he said, "is rain for the thirsty heart. Without it, the soul dries up, cracked and bitter, unable to grow anything good." A woman near the front raised her hand hesitantly. Her face was lined with sorrow, her eyes clouded with years of remembering. "Teacher," she said, her voice trembling, "how many times must I forgive the one who wronged me? Once? Twice? 7 times?" The teacher's eyes softened. He looked toward the falling leaves and smiled. "Not 7 times," he said, "but until the leaves stop falling." The people looked around. Leaves drifted constantly, slow, unending, quiet. The woman's lips parted as understanding dawned. The teacher went on, "Forgiveness is not a number you can count. It is a posture you live in. As the leaves fall, so must your heart release what it holds." He walked to the center of the garden and knelt by a pool of clear water formed from last night's rain. The surface shimmered like glass. "When the rain falls," he said, "it does not choose where to land. It falls upon thorns and roses alike. So too must your forgiveness fall freely, on those who love you and on those who hurt you." He dipped his fingers into the water and let it drip between them. "Do you see? The water does not remain still when disturbed. It ripples outward. Every act of forgiveness you give becomes a ripple that reaches far beyond you." The crowd was still. Some watched the water, others stared at the ground, their thoughts heavy with names, faces, memories that weighed upon their souls. A fisherman broke the silence. "But what if they never asked to be forgiven?" The teacher stood, water glistening on his fingertips. "Then forgive them anyway," he said. "Forgiveness does not free them, it frees you." He turned his hand upward, droplets falling from his palm like tears of light. "The Father forgives you before you ever think to ask, should you do less for one another?" A murmur passed through the crowd. Some nodded, others wept quietly. The teacher looked toward the woman who had spoken first. "When you forgive," he said, "you do not erase what happened, you release it from ruling over you. You make space for peace to return." He looked around, his gaze sweeping the faces gathered beneath the trees. "Think of the heart as a vessel. When it is filled with resentment, there is no room left for joy. But when forgiveness enters, it empties the vessel of bitterness so that grace may dwell there instead." He gestured toward the branches above. "Every leaf that falls is a reminder to let go of what is no longer meant to cling. When you hold on to anger, you cling to a dying thing." The sound of the wind deepened. Leaves began to fall faster, swirling like golden embers through the air. The teacher spread his arms slightly as if to welcome them. "Let them fall," he said, "and let your heart do the same." A man in the back rose slowly. "Teacher," he said, "what of justice? What of the wrong that was never made right?" The teacher looked at him steadily. "Forgiveness is not the denial of justice. It is the release of vengeance. Justice belongs to God. Forgiveness belongs to you." He took a step closer to the man, his voice soft but unwavering. "If you wait for justice before you forgive, your soul will remain in chains. But if you forgive, you hand the chain to the one who knows what to do with it." The man lowered his head, tears slipping silently into his beard. The teacher turned back toward the pool of water and knelt again. "Forgiveness," he said, "is not learned in a day. It flows slowly, like water shaping stone. You may forgive today and find resentment tomorrow, but each time you forgive again, your heart grows softer until bitterness no longer finds a place to stay." He cupped his hand, filled it with water, and poured it gently onto the soil. "The earth does not hold grudges. It receives what falls upon it, and from it life begins again. So must you be willing to begin again." The crowd watched as the water seeped into the dirt, darkening it with promise. "When you forgive," he said, "you do not forget. You remember with peace." The garden grew still, the air filled with quiet awe. The teacher raised his eyes toward the sky. "There is one more thing," he said softly. "You cannot drink from a well poisoned by resentment. The more you forgive, the purer the water of your soul becomes." A few people rose to their feet, as though standing helped them bear the weight of what they had just heard. The teacher's expression was gentle, as if to remind them that no burden was too heavy to set down. He looked to the road beyond the trees, where the horizon shimmered in the late afternoon sun. "There was once a traveler," he said, "who carried stones in his pack, one for every grudge he refused to release." His voice drifted into the soft rhythm of storytelling, the leaves above swaying like an audience to his words. The people leaned in once more, hearts open and ready to hear what comes next. The teacher's voice softened as the last leaves drifted down around him. "There was once a traveler," he began, "who set out on a long road that wound through hills and valleys, leading toward the distant city of peace. He carried a heavy pack upon his back, though inside it were not food or clothing, but stones, one for each person he could not forgive." The people drew closer. Even the wind seemed to quiet itself to listen. "At first," the teacher said, "the pack did not feel so heavy. He thought, 'I'm strong enough to bear it.' He walked for days beneath the sun, through fields of gold and rivers that sparkled in the light. Yet as the road climbed higher, every step began to ache. His shoulders burned, his feet bled. Still, he refused to let go. For each memory that hurt him, each wound unhealed, he kept a stone, proof, he said, of all he had suffered." A child sitting beside her mother frowned. Why didn't he just throw them away? The teacher smiled sadly. Because he believed the stones were part of who he was. He had carried them so long that he mistook their weight for his own strength. The people nodded, some with knowing eyes. "One day," the teacher continued, The traveler reached a hill so steep that he could hardly breathe. His legs trembled. The sun beat down on his back. As he climbed, he heard a voice on the wind, soft, almost like a whisper. "Why do you still carry what you do not need?" The man looked around, but saw no one. Only the trees swayed. He ignored the voice and climbed higher. The teacher drew a line in the soil with his finger, marking the shape of a winding path. As he reached the middle of the hill, the sky darkened. A storm began to rise, rain falling hard, wind tearing through the branches. The man slipped, and the pack dragged him down. In anger, he cursed the sky and blamed the storm for his pain. But again, the voice came, louder this time. "The storm is not against you, it is showing you what weighs you down." The teacher looked toward the sky, as though the wind that had once spoken still lingered there. The traveler fell to his knees, soaked and trembling. He untied the pack and opened it. Inside, the stones glistened wet, heavy as sorrow. One by one, he lifted them into his hands. With each stone, a memory returned, a face, a word, a wound, and with each he whispered, "I forgive you." Then he let the stone roll down the hill. The garden was still now, the crowd held by the quiet rhythm of his words. As he released them, the teacher said, he began to feel lighter. The rain fell harder, but now it felt like blessing, not punishment. When the last stone was gone, he stood, and the pack that had once crushed him was light as a breath. He walked to the top of the hill, and there he saw the city of peace glowing beyond the clouds. A soft wind moved through the trees, stirring the leaves around the teacher's feet. "Forgiveness," he said, "does not erase what was done. It sets the traveler free to continue the journey. The burden of bitterness cannot take you closer to peace. It can only hold you to the place of pain." A young man in the crowd raised his voice. "Teacher, what if someone adds stones faster than we can throw them? Away?" The teacher's eyes lifted to meet his. "Then learn to forgive more quickly than they can wound you. Do not let another's sin make your heart a prison. Freedom begins not when others change, but when you let go." He turned his gaze back toward the soil where he had drawn the winding road. He brushed it smooth with his hand, erasing the line. "The road to peace has no map," he said softly. "It is the path that appears when you lay your burdens down." He rose slowly, the golden light painting his robe in shades of amber and rust. The people felt something shift within them, an invisible burden easing, a breath they hadn't realized they were holding. A man near the back, quiet and weathered from years of labor, spoke up. "I have carried anger so long I no longer remember why. If I set it down, what remains of me?" The teacher stepped closer, his expression both sorrowful and kind. "What remains," he said, "is who you truly are. The part that was buried beneath the weight." He placed his hand over his heart. "You are not your pain. You are the ground that pain fell upon, and still you can grow something beautiful." For a long while, no one spoke. The wind rustled through the garden, scattering the fallen leaves like small golden miracles. The teacher turned his eyes toward the horizon. "Each of you carries a pack," he said. "Some lighter, some heavier. Do not wait until the hill breaks you. Lay it down now." He looked toward the pool where water still shimmered faintly from the earlier rain. "If bitterness is a stone," he said, "then truth is the stream that washes it clean." He began to walk toward the pool, the crowd following slowly behind him. His voice, soft and calm, drifted back through the autumn air. "For only when the heart is free from the weight of what it clings to can it rise to meet the truth. And the truth," he paused, gazing into the rippling water, "the truth will make you free." The people gathered around him again, sensing that what was coming next was not a parable, but a revelation. The teacher lifted his hand, and sunlight caught the water in his palm. "Now," he said, "let us speak of freedom." The sun rested high above the autumn trees, its warmth spilling across the garden like liquid gold. The teacher stood by the still water, where reflections of clouds moved gently across the surface. Around him, the crowd remained quiet, their minds still tracing the story of the traveler who had laid down his stones. Yet now, there was something new in his eyes, something clear, almost fierce, yet peaceful. He spoke softly, but his voice carried the weight of heaven. "You have heard it said that truth is a weapon," he began, "that it cuts, divides, and wounds. But I tell you, truth is not a sword, it is a light." The people stirred, some glancing at each other. The teacher continued, "A sword can destroy what stands before it, but light reveals what is hidden. Light does not fight the dark, it simply shines, and the darkness has no place to stay." He lifted his hand, gesturing toward the water. "Look," he said, "when the water is clear, it shows the sky above it, but when it is stirred by lies, it becomes cloudy and cannot reflect the light. The soul is the same." The wind whispered through the branches, scattering ripples across the pond. The reflection broke, bending the image of the teacher's face. "When a lie enters the heart," he said, "peace disappears. You may convince yourself it is still there, but it becomes only a shadow of peace, quiet on the surface, storm beneath." He looked around at them, eyes meeting theirs one by one. "False peace," he said, "is the silence that hides a lie. It is a smile that covers fear. It is saying, 'I am fine,' when your soul cries for healing." A young woman lowered her head, clutching her hands together. Her voice was small when she spoke. "But teacher, the truth can hurt. It can break hearts. Should we not protect others from it?" The teacher's expression softened. "The truth may wound," he said, "but only lies kill. A wound can heal when it is cleaned by honesty, but a lie festers in the dark." He reached down and touched the water again. "Would you rather hide your sickness or be healed by the pain of cleansing?" The crowd grew still. The teacher rose and began to walk slowly along the garden's edge. "The truth is not cruel," he continued. "It is freedom disguised as pain, for only what is real can be redeemed." A fisherman called out, "How do we know when we are walking in truth?" The teacher turned, smiling faintly. "When your words and your heart say the same thing, you are in truth. When you can stand before God and have nothing to hide, you are free. Truth is not about proving yourself right. It is about being right within." He looked toward the horizon, where the trees shimmered in shades of amber and gold. "You were not created to live behind masks. When you lie, you split your soul into two, one that pretends and one that suffers. But when you walk in truth, you are whole again." He stopped beside a small boy who sat in the grass. "What do you see when you look at the light on the leaves?" he asked him. The boy squinted up. "I see gold, teacher." The teacher nodded. "And what happens when a cloud passes?" "It fades," the boy answered. "Exactly," said the teacher. "Truth is like that gold light. Lies are the clouds that cover it. But no matter how dark the sky becomes, the light is still there, waiting to shine again." He turned to the others. "If you live in truth, you live in the light of the Father. Lies may protect you for a moment, but they will chain you for a lifetime. Truth may humble you for a moment, but it will set you free forever." A murmur of understanding spread through the crowd. Some began to cry quietly, not from guilt, but from the relief of being seen. The teacher's gaze moved over them with compassion. "Freedom," he said gently, "is not the absence of rules or the power to do as you please. It is the peace of living in honesty with God, with others, and with yourself." He walked to a fallen branch and lifted it. "This branch," he said, "was once part of the tree. When it was broken, it could no longer bear fruit. Lies break you in the same way. They separate you from your source. Truth restores the connection." He laid the branch back down. "So speak truth, even when your voice shakes. Live truth, even when the world mocks it. For those who stand in truth, stand with me." The teacher looked toward the crowd, his face calm and radiant in the sunlight. "The truth does not belong to one person," he said. "It belongs to all who seek it, and when you live by it, you carry light into dark places." A silence followed, deep, cleansing, almost sacred. The people breathed easier, as though something inside them had been washed clean. The teacher looked out over the garden and whispered, "Now you are ready to learn what it means to bow low and rise high." He knelt in the dirt, tracing the outline of a small circle with his finger. The leaves stirred again above him, falling in slow spirals as he said, "The light of truth shines brightest upon those who kneel beneath it." He looked up, eyes glimmering like the sun through the branches. "Let us speak," he said, "of humility." The teacher lowered himself to the earth the way the sun leans toward the horizon at dusk, slow, unhurried, intentional. He took a stick from the ground and began to draw in the dust. The crowd gathered closer, but no one dared to speak. The lines he traced were soft and curved, like ripples in still water. "Those who bow low," he said quietly, "are lifted high." His eyes rose from the ground to meet theirs. The proud climb mountains to be seen. The humble bow down and find the summit in their hearts. A murmur moved through the people. Some looked away, ashamed. Others looked inward, wondering where pride had taken root in their lives. The teacher's voice remained gentle. "You cannot drink from a cup already full," he said, "and you cannot receive grace when your heart is swollen with pride." He brushed his hand across the dirt, erasing the lines he had drawn. "The proud build their names in the dust," he whispered, "but the wind remembers only those who served." From the back, a merchant spoke. "Teacher, how can a man live without pride? Without it, the world walks over you." The teacher lifted his eyes, sunlight flickering through the branches above him. "The world may step upon the humble," he said, "but heaven lifts them where no foot can tread. Pride may win applause, but humility wins peace." He stood slowly, the leaves rustling like applause from the trees themselves. "Listen," he said, "I will tell you a story." He stepped closer to the crowd, and his shadow stretched long upon the ground. There were two travelers who walked the same road toward a high mountain. The first carried himself with great confidence. He boasted of his pace, his strength, his wisdom. He refused to help others, for he feared slowing down. The second walked quietly, stopping often to clear stones from the path so those behind him would not stumble. He said little, but his hands never rested. The teacher's voice softened, rhythmic, like the cadence of wind in leaves. The first reached the mountain's base and saw the steepness of its slope. He laughed at its height, boasting, "I will climb alone, for none are worthy to stand beside me." But as he ascended, his pride became his weight. Every step grew heavier, every breath harder, until he fell to his knees and could not rise. He paused, eyes glinting in the sun. The second traveler reached the same mountain. His clothes were dusty, his feet sore, yet his heart was light. For every act of kindness along the road had stripped away a burden. When he began to climb, the earth itself seemed to lift him, and though he moved slowly, he reached the top and found peace waiting for him there. A silence followed, deep and stirring. Even the birds had quieted as if listening. The teacher looked upon the crowd, his voice steady. "The mountain does not care who shouts loudest. It welcomes those who climb with grace." He walked among them, resting his hand upon the shoulder of an older man. "You have labored long in this life," he said gently. "But tell me, have you labored for recognition or for love?" The man lowered his eyes. "I wanted both, Master." The teacher smiled, a sadness hidden behind his kindness. "There is no shame in wanting to be seen, but you must decide whether you seek the eyes of men or the eyes of God. For one gives you a moment of praise, the other gives you eternity." He turned toward the young ones sitting in front, their faces upturned in awe. "Humility," he said, "is not thinking less of yourself. It is thinking of yourself less. It is walking through the world with open hands instead of clenched fists." He knelt again, picking up a handful of dust, letting it sift through his fingers. "From this," he said, "the Father formed you. Dust does not boast, yet it holds life. Do not fear lowering yourself, for that is where the Maker dwells." The crowd listened, moved not by power, but by peace. They could feel the weight of his words settle gently into their chests like seeds. A young man stepped forward. "Teacher, if I humble myself, will others respect me?" The teacher looked at him and shook his head. "Perhaps not. Some may mistake humility for weakness, but the Father sees what the world does not. When you serve others, you serve Him, and those who serve Him lack nothing." He rose once more and brushed the dust from his robe. "Those who bow low are closest to heaven. he said softly. The heart that kneels can hear the voice of God. The wind stirred again, carrying the scent of earth and leaves. The teacher lifted his gaze to the sky. Do not let pride make your prayers loud, he said. Let humility make them heard. He walked toward a nearby tree, its roots wide and deep, its branches heavy with fruit. See this tree? He said, touching the trunk. Its strength is not in what reaches upward, but in what holds beneath. So it is with the soul. The deeper your humility, the stronger your spirit. A calm fell over the crowd. The teacher's words flowed like a quiet stream through their thoughts, cleansing, soothing, reshaping what they believed about greatness. He stepped away from the tree, his eyes drifting to the horizon. The light had shifted, and the sound of a distant river echoed faintly. When the proud pray, he said, their voices rise like thunder and fade. But when the humble pray, heaven bends low to listen. He stopped walking, turned to them with a peaceful smile, and said in a tone almost like a whisper, Come, let us speak to the Father, not with many words, but with hearts made still. The leaves above rustled softly, as though in anticipation. The crowd followed him deeper into the grove, where the sunlight filtered through like quiet blessings. And there, beneath the shelter of the branches, the teacher prepared to show them what it meant to truly pray. The grove was quiet, except for the soft sigh of the wind weaving through the branches. The light had turned to honey, and the air shimmered as if the world itself were holding its breath. The teacher stood at the center, his hands folded before him, his eyes turned toward the sky. Around him, the people gathered, sitting upon the roots and fallen leaves. Their faces were still, waiting. He spoke gently, almost as though the air itself was his listener. When you pray, he said, do not raise your voice to reach heaven. It already hears you. Do not heap words upon words, thinking God listens more to noise than to need. The Father does not count your syllables. He counts your sincerity. He closed his eyes, breathing slowly, and the people followed. The proud pray to be heard by men, he said softly. They love the echo of their own voices, but the humble pray to be seen by God, and he meets them in the silence. The crowd lowered their heads. The wind swayed gently, brushing against their hair, their faces. The teacher's voice came again, calm and low. Prayer is not performance, it is presence, it is breathing with God until his rhythm becomes yours. He knelt upon the earth, pressing his hand into the soil. Do you feel the pulse beneath your feet? He asked. Even the earth prays. It whispers life back to the one who gave it. A young boy's voice rose from the group. Teacher, how should we pray? What words please the shed? Fathermost? The teacher smiled. The words are not what please him, he said. It is the heart that speaks them. He paused for a moment, the stillness deepening. Then he began to speak, each word falling like a drop of clear water. Our Father in heaven, he said, his voice steady and full of warmth, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. The people listened, the rhythm of his prayer sinking into their hearts like song. Give us today our daily bread, he continued, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. When he finished, the grove was silent except for the whisper of the leaves. The people could feel something different, like peace itself had descended upon them and rested quietly upon their shoulders. One of the older men wiped tears from his eyes. Teacher, he said, why do these words feel alive? The teacher looked at him with a kind smile. Because they are, he said. They are not words written on stone or scroll, but words carved upon the heart. When you pray them, they awaken what already lives within you. He looked around, meeting the gaze of each person. Prayer, he continued, is not about changing God's mind. It is about allowing God to change your heart. It is the moment when the created turns back toward the Creator and remembers who they are. A woman, her hands trembling, asked, but what if I have nothing to say? What if my pain steals my words? The teacher knelt before her. Then let your silence speak, he said. The Father understands the language of tears and the weight of unspoken sorrow. Prayer is not always sound. Sometimes it is simply surrender. He rose and spread his arms slightly. The wind prays without words. The rivers sing without tongues. Even the stars declare his glory without speech. So too may your soul praise him without a single word. The people sat still, letting his words soak into the quiet of their hearts. Some closed their eyes and breathed in the wind. Others folded their hands and whispered softly, their prayers barely audible but deeply felt. The teacher looked out over them and spoke again. Do not think that prayer belongs only to the holy or the wise. The Father listens to the small voices of the weary, to the broken and the forgotten. He listens not because you are worthy, but because he is love. He walked toward a tree that leaned slightly over the pool of water from earlier lessons. The reflection trembled as he approached, then stilled when he knelt beside it. When you pray, he said, let your heart become like this water, clear, deep, and still. Then you will see heaven reflected in it. A breeze swept through the grove and the leaves began to whisper again. The teacher looked up and said, the Father knows your needs before you speak them. Prayer is not to inform him. It is to remind you that you are not alone. He turned toward the disciples, his expression both tender and resolute. If you seek strength, he said, pray. If you feel lost, pray. If you're angry, pray. Prayer does not change the storm. It changes the sailor who must face it. A quiet murmur of awe spread through the crowd. Even the smallest children seemed to sense the sacredness of the moment. The teacher stepped back beneath the branches and looked toward the horizon, where the first hints of evening began to settle. Prayer, he said softly, is like planting a seed. You cannot see it grow, but it reaches upward all the same. Every time you speak to the Father in faith, your roots deepen and your spirit strengthens, even when your eyes cannot see the growth. The people listened, watching as he raised his face toward the dimming sky. The wind brushed across the grove once more, and his robe moved like the motion of the sea. Do not be discouraged if you do not see answers right away, he said. Faith grows unseen, just as the roots of a tree do their work beneath the surface. The sound of the wind grew louder, curling through the leaves like breath. The teacher's voice joined it, steady and strong. When you cannot see the hand of God, trust that his seed is still in the soil of your heart, for what is planted in faith will always rise in time. He stepped back into the center of the grove, surrounded by faces illuminated by the last light of the setting sun. Now, he said with a faint smile, let us speak of faith, the seed that waits beneath the soil until the rain of heaven calls it forth. The night had passed gently, and morning unfolded with a hush, the kind that settles before a great revelation. The teacher sat beneath a fig tree, dew glimmering upon the leaves, the ground still cool beneath his feet. Around him, the people gathered again, some weary from travel, others carrying baskets of bread and fruit, their faces expectant. The light filtered through the branches in soft gold, casting long shadows that danced with the breeze. In his hand, the teacher held a seed, small, round, unremarkable, yet the way he looked at it made it seem like a treasure. He held it between his fingers, raising it so the sunlight caught upon its tiny surface. This, he said quietly, is faith. The people leaned closer, squinting, some smiling in confusion. A fisherman whispered to his friend, "It's too small to matter." The teacher's eyes flicked toward him, kind but piercing. "And yet," he said, "this small thing holds a forest." He placed the seed gently into his palm, closing his fingers around it. "Faith begins where sight ends," he said. "You do not see the roots when they grow, yet you believe they are there. You do not see the wind that moves the leaves, yet you feel its touch. Why then do you doubt the unseen hand that shapes your life?" A young woman, her petitious, voice quiet and uncertain, spoke from the crowd. "Teacher, I want to believe, but what if my faith is small, too small to matter?" The teacher smiled softly. "The smallest seed does not remain small forever. It does not demand to be great, it simply surrenders to the soil. So too must your faith. You need not force it to grow, only give it to the one who can." He knelt and pressed the seed into the dirt. His fingers brushed away the excess soil as if tucking it in to rest. Faith is not about size, he continued. It is about surrender. A seed in your pocket will never grow, but one buried in trust will one day become shelter for others. The people watched as he dusted his hands. The garden around them seemed to breathe again, birds returning to the branches, the air warm and alive. The teacher's voice carried easily through the morning air. Many say they have faith, but they keep it safe in their hands. Faith hidden from risk will never bloom. You must let it go, bury it where you cannot see it, and believe that life will come. He stood, brushing his hands together, and turned toward a small patch of soil that had begun to crack from dryness. He pointed to it. This is what happens to the heart that has no faith. It grows dry, afraid to trust the rain. But when faith is planted, the rain does not drown it. It awakens it. A man who had remained silent until now spoke up, his voice heavy with years of hardship. "But Master," he said, "how can I trust when I've been disappointed? How can I plant faith in soil that has already failed me?" The teacher looked at him with deep compassion. "If every farmer stopped sowing because of one barren season," he said, "the world would hunger. Faith does not ignore disappointment. It grows through it, for even when the soil seems dead, the seed still waits, believing in spring." He walked closer to the man, placing a hand upon his shoulder. "You cannot measure faith by what you see today. It is planted in time, but it blooms in eternity." The man nodded slowly, tears glimmering at the edges of his eyes. The teacher turned again toward the crowd. "Faith does not mean you will never fear," he said. "Even the seed trembles beneath the soil before breaking open. Faith means trusting that the breaking is part of becoming." A hush fell again. The teacher's gaze swept over them, each person sensing he spoke directly to the place where their fears lived. "The storm will come," he said quietly. "The winds will rise and the rain will fall heavy. But the seed that has surrendered does not fear the storm. It drinks from it. The roots grow deeper because of it." He stepped back toward the fig tree, resting his hand upon its trunk. "Faith does not ask to escape the storm," he said. "It asks only to endure it." The people were silent, each lost in thought. Some stared at the soil where the seed now slept. Others looked toward the horizon, where clouds began to gather, soft and distant, but certain. The teacher's eyes lifted to the darkening sky. "The test of faith," he said, "is not in calm weather. Anyone can believe when the sun is shining. True faith is revealed when the clouds gather, when the ground shakes, when the path grows uncertain." A child near the front tugged gently at his robe. "Will the seed be afraid of the storm?" she asked. The teacher smiled and knelt beside her. "No," he said. "The seed knows the storm will not last forever. It knows that after the storm the sun will return and the earth will be softer. It knows that growth begins where fear ends." He rose once more, the first cool breeze of the coming wind brushing across his face. The crowd followed his gaze upward, gray clouds forming at the edge of the horizon, the scent of rain drifting on the air. He turned to them, his robe stirring in the wind. "Do not fear what shakes you," he said, "for faith that never faces a storm remains shallow. The roots of heaven reach deepest in the rain." The leaves above rustled louder now, the air grew heavier, and the light began to dim. The people felt the first drop of rain upon their faces, cool and sudden, and they drew closer together. The teacher did not move. His eyes shone, calm and sure, as he looked toward the trembling sky. "Now," he said, "you will see how faith grows, not in stillness, but in the storm." The first thunder rolled across the hills like a distant drum, soft but sure. The people looked up as the sky darkened, its blue fading into gray. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of rain. The teacher stood beneath the fig tree, his robe stirring in the rising wind. Around him, the crowd whispered anxiously, glancing toward the horizon where clouds gathered like armies preparing for war. "The storm comes," he said quietly, almost to himself. Then his gaze lifted, steady and unshaken. "Do not fear it." The first drops fell, slow and deliberate, tapping against leaves and foreheads like a warning. A mother clutched her child close, pulling her shawl tighter. A fisherman looked at the teacher and called out over the wind, "Master, should we not take shelter?" The teacher's eyes softened. "You already are," he said. Lightning cracked across the sky, white and blinding, followed by the low growl of thunder that seemed to shake the ground itself. The people gasped and drew back. The teacher did not move. The rain began to pour in earnest, washing through the garden, turning the soil soft beneath their feet. "Do not run," he said, his voice calm above the chaos. "If you flee every storm, your roots will never grow deep." Some hesitated, others remained frozen. The teacher raised his hand toward the trembling sky. "The storm does not come to destroy," he said. "It comes to reveal." A gust of wind ripped through the trees, bending the branches low, scattering leaves like frightened birds. The people covered their faces. The teacher stood unmoved. "Do you see?" he said. "The shallow roots sway, the deep roots stand." The rain drenched his robe, yet his voice was clear as thunder. "The storm is the test of faith. It does not ask who is strong, but who will remain." A man shouted above the wind, "But teacher, the storm brings fear." The teacher turned toward him, rain streaming down his face. "Fear," he said, "is the wind that shakes the heart before it is rooted. Let it come. Let it pass through you. Only what is not planted in truth will be torn away." Another lightning strike illuminated his face, calm and resolute, framed by branches dancing violently in the wind. Around him, chaos. Within him, stillness. A young woman fell to her knees, the mud clinging to her robe. "Help me believe," she cried. "I want to stand, but I'm afraid." He stepped toward her, kneeling beside her as rain fell in sheets around them. "You do not need to be unafraid to have faith," he said softly. "You only need to stay when you want to run." She looked up, eyes wide, and he smiled gently. "Faith is not the absence of fear. It is the courage to move through it." The thunder rumbled again, closer this time, yet his words seemed louder still. "The wind may strip the branches," he said, "but what is rooted in love will not break." The people clung to his voice like a lifeline. Some stood, hands trembling but lifted. Others knelt in the mud, weeping openly, not from terror, but from the strange peace rising within them. The teacher lifted his face to the sky. "Father," he prayed, "let them see what you see, that even in the storm you are near." And as if heaven itself responded, the lightning softened, the thunder quieted, and the rain turned to a steady rhythm, gentle and steady, like the beating of a heart. The teacher rose and looked around. The people stared at him in silence. His robe clung to him, soaked and heavy, yet his steps were light as he moved through the puddled ground. "Do not curse the rain that waters your roots," he said. "Without it, there would be no growth." A young disciple, shivering and pale, whispered, "Master, when will it end?" "When it has done its work," he answered. He picked up a fallen branch, broken clean from the tree, and held it out. "This branch was proud once," he said, reaching high and thinking itself strong, but its roots were shallow. The storm did not break it. It revealed what was already weak. He placed the branch gently back upon the ground. "Let the storm teach you what still needs to grow." The rain began to fade, the sky brightening little by little. The light that returned was not the same as before. It was clearer, pure, as though the world had been washed clean. The leaves shimmered with drops like scattered jewels. The teacher turned toward the horizon, where a single ray of sunlight pierced through the clouds. "The storm does not end in destruction," he said softly. "It ends in renewal. The tree that survives becomes stronger. The heart that endures grows wiser." He looked back at his disciples, their faces wet and glistening, not only from rain but from tears. "Do not despise your trials," he told them. "They are the rain that proves your roots." The people began to breathe easier. The air smelled of earth and promise. A bird, brave and small, landed upon a nearby branch and began to sing. The teacher smiled faintly. "Do you hear?" he said. "Even the sparrow knows. The storm was not the end." He turned his eyes once more to the sky, the light of the breaking sun shining upon his face. Peace, he said, is not found when the storm is gone. It is found in knowing who stands with you through it. The people followed his gaze, watching as the last clouds drifted away, leaving behind a sky of deep blue and gold. The garden, though wet and torn in places, seemed more alive than before, the colors richer, the air cleaner, the world reborn. The teacher began to walk toward the clearing where the light was strongest, his steps quiet upon the damp ground. The crowd followed, not because they were told, but because they felt drawn toward that calm after the storm, the peace that had always been there, waiting to be seen. The wind softened to a gentle hum, brushing past them like a sigh of relief. The teacher stopped at the edge of the clearing, where sunlight spilled freely upon the earth. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply, as if savoring the quiet that had returned. "The storm reveals," he said, almost to himself, "but peace restores." And with that, he stepped forward into the golden light, the calm of morning settling once again upon the garden. The wind had softened into a whisper, the sky washed clean from its fury. Drops of rain still clung to the leaves, trembling like pearls. The garden was hushed, a living thing catching its breath. The people stood motionless for a moment, their hearts beating in rhythm with the settling world. What had been chaos was now calm. What had been fear was now stillness. The teacher stood among them, his robe damp and heavy, his hair glistening in the faint sunlight that broke through the clouds. Around his feet, puddles mirrored the sky. The disciples looked at him in quiet wonder, for he didn't seem weary. His eyes were steady and full of peace, the kind that couldn't be shaken by storm or sorrow. "Peace," he said softly, "is not the absence of chaos, but the presence of trust." His words lingered in the air, gentle as the drifting mist. "Anyone can rest when the sky is clear," he continued, "but the one who trusts finds rest even when thunder roars. True peace does not wait for calm skies. It dwells within the heart that believes." He looked around, meeting the eyes of those who still trembled. "When the storm raged, some of you called out for me to calm it, but now you see, it was not the wind that needed calming. It was your hearts." The crowd bowed their heads. They understood now that the storm had not come to test their strength, but to reveal their faith. The teacher walked toward the center of the garden, where a great stone stood slick with rain. He sat upon it and motioned for the others to gather. "Come," he said. "The storm has passed. Let us share bread." The disciples came forward, laying what little they had upon the stone, a few loaves, some dried figs, a handful of olives. It was simple fare, but they gave it freely. The teacher broke the bread, steam rising softly from its center, and handed pieces to those near him. "Peace begins," he said, "when we stop keeping what was meant to be shared." They ate together beneath the silver light of the fading clouds. Each bite felt sacred, like communion with the calm that had descended. For the first time in many days, laughter returned, quiet at first, then warm and full. Even the birds, newly returned to the branches, seemed to join in their joy. A young woman sat near the teacher, her eyes fixed upon him. "Master," she said, "how can we hold on to this peace when the storms return, for the world is full of them?" The teacher tore another piece of bread and placed it into her hand. "Peace is not something you hold," he said. "It is something that holds you. You cannot keep it as one keeps a possession. You can only dwell within it. It is a gift, not a grasp." He looked to the horizon, where the last of the storm clouds drifted away. "The peace of heaven is not fragile," he said. "It does not break when the world trembles. It flows like a river through all things. You need only remain still enough to feel it." An older man, his hands rough from labor, nodded slowly. "Then peace is not found in quiet places," he murmured, "but in quiet hearts." The teacher smiled. "Yes," he said, "the one who carries peace within will find it everywhere." He stood again, stretching his hand toward the sky where sunlight now spilled through the clouds like golden threads. "You see the light returning," he said. "The same sun that burned above the storm now warms the ground. Nothing has changed but your eyes. Peace is not born from new circumstances, it is born from new vision." He turned his gaze upon the puddles shimmering at his feet. Even the rain, which seemed harsh, has given life to what was dry. Every storm leaves behind something good for those who wait with faith. The people listened, their hearts steady, their breath slowing as if they too had been washed clean. The air was warm again, carrying the scent of wet earth and new beginnings. The teacher stepped forward, bending down to draw a small circle in the mud. Inside it, he placed a fallen leaf. "This leaf," he said, "once clung to its branch, afraid to fall, but when it let go, the wind carried it where it needed to be. So it is with peace. It comes when we release what we cannot control." He looked up, the corners of his mouth curving into a quiet smile. "You will face many storms yet," he said. "But when they come, remember this. You are not alone in the wind. Peace is not what the world gives. It is what the Father gives, and no storm can take it away." The disciples sat quietly, absorbing every word. Some closed their eyes, breathing deeply. Others simply watched him, their teacher, whose calm seemed larger than the sky itself. Then, as if sensing something in the distance, the teacher turned his head toward the path that led out of the garden. "The world will call you to anger, to bitterness, to hate," he said softly. "But peace is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of love." He brushed his hand along the leaves, the raindrops scattering like tiny stars. "You have learned to be still," he said. "Now you must learn to love. For peace without love is like calm water with no reflection, beautiful but empty." The wind stirred one final time, carrying the scent of blooming figs. The teacher's eyes brightened with quiet joy. "Come," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, yet filled with certainty. "Let us speak now of love, the command that fulfills all others." And as the garden basked in the first full light of day, the people followed him once more, hearts open, ready to learn of the love that could calm even the fiercest storm within. The teacher walked toward the heart of the garden where the sunlight fell in broken rays through the branches. The air was warm and full of life again. The storm had washed away dust and fear alike, leaving behind only freshness and the scent of wet leaves. The people followed quietly, still holding the peace they had found beneath the thunder. He turned to them and opened a scroll, its edges slightly damp but unharmed. His voice, steady and deep, rolled through the grove like a calm river. "Love one another," he read, "as I have loved you." He closed the scroll slowly, his eyes meeting theirs. "You have heard many commands," he said. "Do not steal. Do not kill. Do not lie. But this is the command that gives life to all others." The crowd was silent, their attention fixed on him. He spoke again, each word deliberate. "To love as I love is not to love with convenience, but with sacrifice. It is not to love those who deserve it, but those who don't. It is not to love only when loved in return, but to love when the heart is rejected and still remain kind." He stepped closer, the leaves rustling gently beneath his feet. "If you only love those who love you, what reward is there in that? Even those who know nothing of the Father do the same. But if you love those who curse you, forgive those who wound you, and bless those who despise you, then you walk in the light of heaven." The people shifted uneasily. Some glanced downward, their hearts pierced by the truth they could not deny. The teacher continued, "You say you know God, but how can you know him if you do not love? For God is love. To walk without love is to walk in darkness, even beneath the brightest sun." He paused, letting his words linger like fragrance in the air. Then he looked to the sky where a single dove flew across the clearing. "Love is not a feeling that fades with the day. It is a flame that endures night after night. It bears pain, yet never breaks. It gives without expecting return. Love is not a weak heart. It is the strongest thing a soul can carry." A man near the front, his voice quiet, asked, "Teacher, what if love is not returned? What if it is met only with scorn?" The teacher's gaze softened. "Then it is most like my love," he said. "For my love is not measured by response, but by persistence. Love does not die when it is unreceived. It becomes eternal." He looked out across the garden. "Do not think love is blind," he said. "It sees clearer than anything else. It sees the wounds in others that bitterness cannot heal. It sees the heart behind anger, the pain behind cruelty. Love looks deeper than the act. It sees the soul beneath. He knelt again upon the damp earth, running his hand across the soil where the seed of faith had been planted earlier. Faith grows roots, he said, but love is the blossom that reveals the fruit. Without love, faith is only a tree without leaves. He turned toward the disciples who stood closest to him. When the storms come again, do not hold your peace only for yourselves. Let it flow into others, for peace that does not touch another's life is only silence. Love makes peace alive. He stood, brushing his hands clean. There is no greater power in this world than love, he said. It breaks chains that words cannot. It softens hearts that laws could never move. And it conquers fear, for fear cannot breathe where love abides. He looked around, and for a long moment, no one spoke. The sound of birds filled the silence, gentle and rhythmic. Finally, he said, "When you love, you carry me within you. When you hate, you push me away. Remember this, the measure of your faith is not your prayers, not your works, but your love." A mother, her eyes brimming with tears, whispered, "Even love for enemies?" The teacher turned to her and smiled faintly. "Especially them. For when you love your enemy, you show them a glimpse of heaven they have never known. You remind them they are not beyond grace." He walked a few steps toward the edge of the grove, where the path curved toward a narrow stream. The water flowed slowly, its surface glimmering under the sun. "Love is like this stream," he said, gesturing toward it. "It moves quietly, sometimes unseen, but it shapes everything it touches. It carves valleys, nourishes roots, and softens even the hardest stone." The people followed his gaze, watching the light dance upon the water. "You cannot force love to flow where it is not welcome," he continued, "but you can let it overflow from your own heart. And when it does, even those who resist it will one day be changed by its persistence." He crouched by the stream, cupping his hands into the cool water. Love refreshes those who drink from it, and even those who are offered and refuse still feel its grace in the air. As he stood again, droplets fell from his fingers, catching the sunlight. "You have learned to find peace within yourselves," he said. "Now you must learn to share it, to pour it out like water for the thirsty." The disciples exchanged glances, understanding the weight of his words. Love was not a feeling to hold, but a calling to live. The teacher's expression grew thoughtful, almost heavy. "But love," he said softly, "is not tested in quiet gardens or gentle mornings. It is tested when the stranger comes, when kindness is inconvenient, when compassion costs something. That is where love is proven true." He turned his eyes down the winding path where a figure appeared in the distance, a weary traveler, stumbling and clutching a cup in his hands. The teacher watched him approach, a knowing calm in his face. "Now," he said quietly, almost to himself, "you will see what love looks like when it meets need." And as the traveler drew closer, dust clinging to his clothes and thirst written upon his face, the teacher stepped forward to meet him, his hand already reaching for the water that remained. The sound of the stream still whispered softly when the figure appeared at the edge of the grove. The stranger's steps were uneven, his clothes torn and dust-covered, his face shadowed by exhaustion. The people fell silent as he drew nearer, their gazes wary. His eyes were hollow yet searching, his hands trembling as he clutched a small clay cup chipped along the rim. He stopped a few paces away from the teacher and bowed his head. "Please," he murmured, his voice rough and weak, "I have walked far. My tongue is dry, my strength nearly gone. I seek only a drink of water." Some of the disciples exchanged uneasy glances. One whispered to another, "He is not one of us. He could be a thief or a wanderer from a cursed place." Others turned away slightly, uncertain if it was wise to come closer. The teacher looked at the man for a long moment, then stepped forward, his expression calm and filled with quiet mercy. "Sit," the teacher said. "Rest your feet. The ground will not reject you." The stranger hesitated, as if unworthy of such an invitation. "I have nothing to give in return," he said. The teacher knelt by the stream, cupping his hands into the water. "Then you will give what is more precious than gold," he said gently. "You will give me your story." He filled the stranger's cup and held it out to him. The man accepted it with shaking hands, and as the water touched his lips, his whole body seemed to sigh with relief. "You give me life," he whispered. The teacher smiled faintly. "No," he said. "The Father gives life. I only share it." The disciples watched, still uncertain. One of them spoke, his tone respectful but cautious. "Master, there are many who wander these roads. If we give to all who ask, what will be left for us?" The teacher turned toward him, his eyes full of both kindness and truth. "What is kept in closed hands," he said, "soon withers. But what is given freely multiplies. The heart that gives does not lose. It grows." He looked again at the stranger. "Whoever gives even a cup of cold water to one of the least of these gives it to me. For love that stops at its own comfort is not love at all." The crowd fell silent. The teacher's voice carried through the stillness. "You measure generosity by how much you give," he said, "but heaven measures it by how much you keep." He gestured for the others to draw near. Some hesitated, but the young boy who had spoken before stepped forward and offered a piece of his bread. The stranger accepted it gratefully, tears streaming down his face. "Why are you kind to me?" he asked, his voice shaking. The teacher knelt beside him. "Because the Father was kind to me," he said, "and what is received must be shared. Grace is not meant to be stored. It is meant to flow." The people felt a stirring within them, something unfamiliar yet beautiful. They saw that love was not only spoken, it was shown, given, lived. The teacher turned to them and said, "There will always be strangers among you. Some will come hungry, others wounded, others weary. Do not turn them away, for in welcoming them, you welcome the presence of God." He looked toward the crowd, his voice growing firmer. "It is easy to love the friend, to serve the familiar face. But when you serve the forgotten, when you offer without expecting return, your heart becomes like the Father's, open, boundless, full." He helped the stranger to his feet, steadying him by the arm. "Walk with us a while," he said. "You need not carry your journey alone." The man nodded weakly, gratitude etched deep into his tired expression. He took a few steps and then looked back. "I came seeking water," he said, "but I have found something greater. You have given me peace." The teacher looked at him, his eyes glinting with warmth. "Then carry that peace to another who thirsts," he said, "for love is a river that never runs dry when it flows from a willing heart." The stranger smiled faintly, his steps stronger now as he joined the others. The people around him began to speak softly among themselves, their faces brightening. They understood, perhaps for the first time, that compassion was not a lesson. It was a life. The teacher walked beside the stream once more, his reflection moving gently upon the water. "Not wait for great moments to serve," he said. "Serve in the small ones, the unnoticed ones. The smallest kindness, done in love, is greater than the grandest act done in pride." He picked up the chipped cup the stranger had left behind and held it to the light. "Even a broken vessel," he said, "can carry water that gives life." The people watched him in silence, feeling the weight and wonder of his words settle in their hearts. Some began to gather the fallen branches and clear the ground where others could sit. Others poured water for those who had none. Each act was simple, yet radiant. The teacher smiled as he watched them. "The kingdom of heaven," he said softly, "is not built with power, but with compassion. Every hand that serves builds a bridge between heaven and earth." The garden shimmered under the afternoon light, alive with gentle movement. The sound of water, the laughter of children, the quiet murmur of those who had once feared to give and now found joy in doing so. The teacher sat upon a smooth stone and looked around at the gathering of hearts awakened to kindness. His voice, though quiet, carried to every ear. "You have learned to give," he said. "Now learn to heal. For the hands that serve in love can also mend what the world has broken." And as the wind moved softly through the trees, the people drew closer, ready to hear how their hands, simple, ordinary, human, could become the very instruments of heaven's mercy. The sun hung low over the garden, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. The air was cool but soft, the kind that carried the scent of earth and rain. The people sat scattered among the trees, their faces calm, their spirits refreshed from the lessons of love. Yet among them were those still burdened, some by illness, others by sorrow too deep for words. The teacher looked upon them, his gaze tender, filled with compassion that seemed to reach beyond the body and touch the soul itself. He stood slowly, his robe brushing the fallen leaves. "You have learned to love," he said quietly. "But love that does not move the hands is only half awake. The Father's love does not stop at words. It reaches, it restores, it heals." A man leaned heavily against a tree nearby, his hand pressed to his chest as he coughed, each breath shallow and strained. The teacher walked to him, kneeling so their eyes met. "What do you seek?" he asked. The man's voice trembled. "To breathe again, teacher, to wake without pain." The teacher's hand rested upon his shoulder. "Then breathe," he said softly. "Breathe, and let your soul remember that it was never forsaken." He closed his eyes, and for a moment the entire grove seemed to still. Even the wind quieted. Then, as the man drew his next breath, the ragged sound was gone. His chest rose easily, freely. His eyes widened, and tears fell freely down his face. "I can breathe," he whispered. "I can breathe." Again. The people gasped. Some stepped forward in awe, others fell to their knees. The teacher did not move as they marveled. He simply smiled, the way sunlight smiles when it breaks through clouds. "The Father heals not through power, but through mercy," he said. "And mercy is not earned, it is given." A woman near the back cried out suddenly, her voice raw with anguish. "Teacher, my son is sick. He cannot walk. He lies at home, weak and fading. Will you come?" The teacher turned toward her. "Bring him to me," he said. "Or rather, bring your faith, for it is not my hand that heals, it is your belief that opens the door." Two men carried the boy on a small cloth stretcher. His face was pale, his eyes dull with pain. The teacher knelt beside him, brushing the hair from the boy's forehead. "Do you believe," he asked gently, "that the Father can make you whole?" The boy's voice was faint but sure. "Yes, teacher." "Then rise," he said. The boy blinked, uncertain. The people leaned in, hearts pounding in the stillness. Slowly, the boy pushed himself up, his trembling hands pressing against the ground. Then, to everyone's wonder, he stood, his legs steady beneath him for the first time in years. His mother fell to her knees, weeping uncontrollably. "Thank you, Lord," she cried. "Thank you." The teacher helped the boy stand tall and looked to the crowd. "You see," he said, "faith is not a wish, it is a living thing. It breathes, it moves, it touches the unseen and brings it into life." He placed his hands together and looked upward. "The Father does not heal to prove his power," he said. "He heals to reveal his heart." As the crowd surrounded him, more came forward, each carrying their pain. A blind man approached, guided by his daughter. A woman with trembling hands reached for his robe. A child with fever slept against her mother's shoulder. The teacher moved among them quietly, speaking little, only touching, listening, loving. Where his hands rested, peace followed. The blind man blinked and gasped as colors flooded his sight. The woman's shaking ceased, the child's fever broke. But what struck the people most was not the power, it was the gentleness. Each act was slow, deliberate, full of care, as if the teacher saw not just the sickness but the story behind it. After a time, he sat once more beneath the great tree. "Do not look only at the healing," he said softly. "Look at the heart behind it. Healing is not only for the body, it is for the soul that has forgotten its worth." He turned his gaze to the disciples. "You have seen what love can do," he said. "Now go and do the same. When you see pain, do not look away. When you hear suffering, do not cover your ears. To heal is to become a vessel of heaven's kindness." One of the disciples asked, "But teacher, what if we fail? What if our hands cannot do what yours have done?" The teacher smiled, gently. "Then let them do what they can. A word of comfort, a shared meal, a patient ear. These too are healing. The Father uses every willing hand." He rose, brushing the dust from his robe. "Remember," he said, "to heal is not to erase the wound, but to help another remember they are more than their pain. Some healing happens in a touch. Some happens in forgiveness. Some in time." The sun had begun to lower, casting the grove in soft amber light. The teacher looked around, his eyes filled with quiet pride as the people began helping one another. offering water, holding hands, binding small wounds. The garden itself seemed to hum with life, as though heaven's breath lingered there. He turned toward the setting sun, his shadow stretching long across the path. "Faith without love is like a song without sound," he said. "But love in motion, faith in action, this is what reveals the kingdom." The disciples followed his gaze toward the horizon, where the fields beyond the garden glowed gold in the fading light. The teacher's voice lowered, calm and steady. "Come," he said. "Let us walk to the fields, where faith becomes work and work becomes worship." And so, as the evening wind carried the scent of harvest through the air, the teacher began walking toward the open land, his hands, still damp with healing, brushing gently against the tall grass that awaited his next lesson. The sun had dipped lower in the sky, soft light spilling across the fields as the teacher led the people down a narrow path that wound between trees and open meadows. The air carried the scent of water before they saw it, the faint sound of rushing current growing louder as they approached the river's edge. The stream was wide, its surface restless from the rain that had fallen earlier. The light shimmered across it, dancing like gold upon glass. The disciples hesitated. "Master," one of them said, pointing to the river, "the current is strong. How will we cross?" The teacher did not answer immediately. He looked out over the water, calm and still, as if he could hear something beyond the sound of the river itself. "Faith," he said softly, "is not proven in still ground, but in uncertain steps." The people exchanged uneasy glances. The river was deep enough to sweep them away, and no bridge or boat was in sight. Some began to murmur, wondering if they should turn back. But the teacher stepped closer to the edge, the hem of his robe brushing the water. "You see the river," he said. "You fear it because it moves, but faith was made for what moves." He stepped into the water. To the shock of all watching, the surface beneath his feet held firm, rippling slightly, yet solid as stone. He looked back at them, not with command, but invitation. "Come," he said. The people froze. The river rushed loud, defiant. The air seemed to tighten with their hesitation. A young boy, the same who had spoken earlier by the garden, took the first step. His foot touched the water, and it held. He gasped, then took another step, eyes wide with wonder. "It's real!" he cried. "It's holding me!" The crowd stirred. Slowly, others followed, one after another, stepping into the impossible. The teacher remained in the center of the river, his eyes fixed on them, his voice calm and steady. "Do not look down," he said. "The moment you doubt, you will sink beneath what you fear. Keep your eyes on what is true, and truth will carry you." A woman hesitated on the edge, trembling. "I can't," she whispered. "What if I fall?" The teacher reached out his hand. "You already fall when you do not move," he said. "Faith does not wait for courage. Faith is courage, disguised as surrender." She took his hand and stepped forward. Her feet met the surface, and for a moment her body wavered, but his grip was firm. Her breath caught in disbelief. "It's holding me," she whispered, tears mixing with the river's mist. One by one they crossed, each step uncertain yet made certain by the one who walked before them. Some stumbled and regained balance, others froze halfway, needing his voice to steady them. "Do not fear the depth beneath you," he said. "The Father's hand is deeper still." The sound of the river filled the air, but their hearts grew quiet. They began to understand. The crossing was not about reaching the other side. It was about learning that faith is not sight and trust is not safety. It is movement, even when the way forward trembles. Midway through, one of the disciples faltered. The water beneath his feet wavered, his confidence breaking. "Lord," he cried, his voice sharp with panic, "I'm sinking!" The teacher turned instantly, reaching for him. His hand caught the disciple's arm, lifting him up before the river could take him. "Why did you doubt?" the teacher asked softly. His tone held no anger, only sorrow. "Did the water change? Or did your faith?" The disciple wept as the teacher steadied him. "Forgive me, Master. I saw the waves more than I saw you." The teacher smiled faintly. "Then look again," he said. The disciple lifted his eyes, and there was peace once more. Together, they continued across, the river whispering beneath their feet. When the last of the people stepped onto the far shore, they looked back in silence. The river flowed as it always had, wild and restless, yet the path they had walked shimmered faintly beneath the surface, as though marked by invisible light. The teacher stood beside them, his gaze upon the horizon. "You see," he said softly, "faith does not still the river. It simply reveals that you were never walking on water. You were walking on trust." The crowd fell to their knees, overwhelmed. Some reached down to touch the ground beneath them, still damp with the memory of miracle. The teacher knelt among them. "You think faith is something you hold," he said. "But faith holds you. It carries you where sight cannot." He looked up, eyes glinting with compassion. "And when you stumble, the hand that raised the mountains will lift you again." A quiet peace settled over the group. The sound of the river seemed to soften, now more song than roar. A few of the disciples began to gather near the teacher, whispering among themselves about what they had just witnessed. But one, a young man who had crossed last, lingered behind. He stood by the water, staring at the ripples where his feet had once stood. His face was troubled, his brows drawn in thought. The teacher watched him silently, then said, "You see the river still moves, and you wonder, if the current had grown stronger, would it have held?" The young man hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, master, my faith was enough for calm water, but if it raged again, I do not know if I would stand." The teacher stepped beside him, placing a hand upon his shoulder. "Then you have found the truth," he said softly. "Faith begins where certainty ends, but doubt is the shadow that follows faith, not its enemy. You cannot learn trust without first meeting fear." The young man looked up at him, eyes filled with both awe and unease. "Then, teacher," he said quietly, "must we face fear again to grow?" The teacher turned his eyes toward the mountains beyond the fields, their peaks rising into clouds heavy with evening light. His expression grew distant, solemn. "Yes," he said, "for even the strongest faith must be refined in the fire of doubt before it shines." He began to walk forward, the others following close behind, their feet leaving faint prints upon the wet earth. The sound of the river faded behind them as they entered the quiet of the open plain. And though the sun still shone, a heaviness hung in the air, a sense that the peace they carried would soon be tested, and that not all hearts were ready for what was to come. The air had grown cooler as evening crept across the plain. The sky glowed with a deep orange hue, and the last light of the sun shimmered faintly upon the wet ground they had crossed. The disciples walked behind the teacher, their robes clinging to them with the dampness of the river's spray. Their hearts were full of awe, but also an unspoken unease, each of them silently asking what kind of faith could walk on water and what kind could sink beneath it. One of them, Thomas, lingered behind. His steps were slower than the others, his eyes distant. He had crossed the river like the rest, but his heart had not crossed with him. It stayed somewhere in the middle, where fear had whispered his name. The teacher noticed his hesitation and stopped. The others continued forward a few paces before turning to see what had stilled him. "Thomas," the teacher said gently, "why do your feet move while your heart stays behind?" Thomas looked down, ashamed. "Master," he said softly, "I followed you across, but I do not know if I believed it was truly the water that held me. Perhaps the river was shallow. Perhaps it was your power alone." The teacher's eyes were kind but searching. "And if it were my power alone," he asked, "would that make your faith smaller or my love greater?" Thomas hesitated, his lips parting to speak, but no words came. The teacher took a step closer, his voice low and calm. "Faith does not make the impossible happen," he said. "It allows you to see that nothing is impossible with the Father. Even when you doubt, His hand does not let go." They began to walk again, side by side, their feet leaving soft impressions upon the damp earth. "When you stepped into the river," the teacher said, "you did not know what would happen. You simply moved. That is faith, not certainty, but obedience in the unknown." Thomas lowered his head. "But Master, I hesitated. My heart trembled. I felt fear." The teacher smiled faintly. "Fear is not failure," he said. "It is the shadow cast by faith when it stands before the light. Every man who believes must first walk through his own doubt." The disciples ahead slowed their pace, sensing the weight of what was being said. The teacher continued, his voice gentle yet unwavering. "Do you think the Father's love withdraws when your faith falters? No, Thomas. Little faith still reaches me. Even when your steps sink, my hand remains near." Thomas stopped walking. The wind carried his words like a confession. "I want to believe with all my heart," he said, "but I'm afraid that my heart is too weak." The teacher placed his hand upon Thomas's shoulder. "Then believe with your weakness," he said. "The Father does not ask for perfect hearts, only honest ones. The smallest spark of faith, even hidden beneath fear, is still enough to call my name." Thomas looked up at him, eyes shimmering with tears. "And if I fall again?" "Then I will reach again," the teacher said simply. They continued walking until they reached the base of a small hill. There, the teacher sat upon a rock, and the others gathered around him. The air was quiet now, only the soft hum of insects and the rustle of grass filling the stillness. The teacher looked out over the fading light and spoke, his tone filled with both strength and tenderness. "Many think faith is like fire, that it must burn bright and fierce, or else it dies. But faith is like breath, sometimes deep, sometimes shallow, yet always returning. Even when you think it has left you, it waits quietly for you to breathe again." The disciples listened, their hearts still. "When you stumble," he continued, "do not despair. Every faltering step teaches you to walk again. The Father does not despise the trembling one. He holds them until they learn to stand." He looked toward the horizon where the first stars began to appear. "There will come a time when the storm returns and your faith will shake again. But remember, your strength is not in how tightly you hold to me, but in how firmly I hold to you." The crowd fell silent. Some bowed their heads in reflection. Others watched him with eyes full of quiet awe. Even Thomas, whose heart had trembled with uncertainty, felt something within him begin to settle. It was not a sudden surge of confidence, but a deep knowing, peace taking root where fear once grew. The teacher rose and looked over his followers. "Faith will falter," he said softly, "but grace does not." He began walking up the hill, his robe brushing against the tall grass that swayed in the wind. The people followed, their steps slower, thoughtful. The stars above grew brighter, each one a pinprick of promise in the night sky. At the top of the hill, he stopped and turned back to them. "The Father measures faith not by its strength, but by its endurance," he said. "The one who keeps walking, even with shaking hands and a trembling heart, has greater faith than the one who never faced the storm." Thomas stood among the others, his head bowed. Then, with quiet courage, he lifted his eyes and said, "I will walk again, Master. Even if my steps falter, I will walk." The teacher smiled. "And when you do," he said, "you will not walk alone." The wind grew soft again, carrying the scent of distant blossoms from beyond the fields. The teacher looked toward the horizon, where the faint glow of firelight flickered from a small village in the distance. His eyes lingered there for a moment before he said, "Come. There are hearts waiting beyond these hills, hearts broken, forgotten, and longing to be restored." The people followed as he began descending the slope, the night gathering around them like a quiet cloak. The air was cool, but their hearts were warm, steady, and alive once more. The teacher's steps were unhurried, his voice gentle as he spoke into the dark. "For every faith that falters, there is a heart that can still be mended. And the Father," he looked back at them, the firelight in his eyes, "the Father delights in restoring what was once broken." The village lay quiet at the base of the hill, its homes simple, walls of clay, roofs of straw, doors creaking in the soft night wind. The teacher walked ahead, lantern light flickering across his face. Behind him, the disciples followed, their footsteps hushed. A few dogs barked in the distance, and the faint smell of bread baking drifted through the cool air. As they entered the village, they passed by faces lined with weariness. Mothers held tired children, men sat in silence beside fading fires. Poverty hung thick as mist, and hopelessness lingered like an unspoken prayer. The teacher stopped in the center of the square where a broken well leaned to one side, its rope frayed, its bucket shattered. He looked upon it for a moment and said quietly, "Even a well that is cracked still remembers how to give water." A woman stepped forward from the shadows. Her eyes were swollen from tears, her hands trembling as she clutched a worn cloth against her chest. "Teacher," she whispered, "my son has gone astray. He left our home, took what little we had, and now wanders lost in shame. I have prayed and prayed, but heaven seems silent." The teacher turned toward her, his expression soft yet piercing. "Tell me," he said, "when he left, did your love for him leave too?" She shook her head, clutching the cloth tighter. "No, Master, I love him still, even if he never returns." The teacher nodded gently. "Then you have already spoken the language of the Father. Grace does not wait for return, it runs to meet the lost." He lifted the broken bucket beside the well, turning it over in his hands. "Many think grace is a reward," he said, "but grace is the river's current. It carries the fallen, it lifts the weary, it flows even where the ground is dry." He knelt beside the cracked stones of the well and touched them as though they were sacred. "This well has been struck by time," he said, "but the water beneath still flows. So it is with the soul that feels broken. The Father does not replace what is cracked, he restores it." A man from the crowd stepped forward, his voice bitter. "But what of those who keep failing, Master? What of those who repent then fall again? Should grace not end where disobedience begins?" The teacher's eyes met his, steady as the stars. "If grace ended where sin began," he said, "none of us would stand. Grace does not excuse the fall, it lifts from it. Each time you rise, grace rises with you." He placed the broken bucket back beside the well. "The Father's mercy is not measured in quantity but in endurance. The well may run low, but his grace never does." The people listened in silence, many with tears glistening in the lamplight. The teacher stepped forward, his presence filling the space with warmth that seemed to reach every corner of the square. "You are not the sum of your failures," he said. "You are the story of your Father's love written through them." He looked to the woman again. "Your son will return when he remembers your love. But even if he does not, your grace toward him will not be wasted. Every act of mercy, every prayer whispered in faith, ripples farther than your eyes can see." The woman fell to her knees, sobbing softly. The teacher knelt beside her, lifting her chin. "Do not look at what is lost," he said. "Look at what still lives within you. Grace that survives heartbreak is the strongest kind of love." A stillness filled the night. The disciples stood quietly, their hearts stirred. They understood now that grace was not gentle forgiveness. It was fierce endurance, a relentless kindness that refused to give up. The teacher rose to his feet. "You speak of those who fall," he said, "but the Father delights in Serene, lifting the fallen. When the sheep wanders, he leaves the 99. When the sun runs, he prepares the feast. When the sinner hides, he calls their name." He spread his hands as if to embrace the entire village. The Father's grace does not wait for perfection. It meets imperfection and calls it home. The crowd murmured in awe, their hearts stirred by a warmth that had no name but love. Some fell to their knees. Others wept quietly. The teacher's voice softened once more. "If your heart is broken, know this. It is through the cracks that grace flows in." He turned toward the broken well once more. The moonlight shimmered upon the stones, and suddenly a faint sound began to rise from below. A drip, then a trickle, then a steady stream of water. The people gasped, rushing forward as the well came alive again, water bubbling up from the depths. The teacher smiled. "The living water never ceases," he said, "even when the vessel breaks." He stepped back, the water glistening beneath the moonlight, and looked toward his disciples. "This is the work of grace, to restore what the world has forgotten, to remind the broken they are still beloved." He paused, looking up toward the starlit sky. "The Father gives freely, not because we are worthy, but because he is good." A young girl ran forward, cupping water in her small hands, and drank. She laughed. a sound so pure it echoed through the night like music. The teacher's eyes softened. "There," he said. "Do you hear it? Gratitude is the song of the restored." The people looked at one another, at the well, at the sky, at him, and felt something rise within them. Not just relief, but thankfulness. It was as though every healed heart, every forgiven mistake, every act of grace had joined together in a quiet chorus of gratitude. The teacher began to walk again, his footsteps light upon the damp earth. "Grace restores," he said softly, "and gratitude remembers." He turned toward the path that led out of the village, his voice barely above a whisper. "Come," he said. "Let us speak now of thankfulness, the voice of the soul that knows it has been redeemed." The night deepened, but the village glowed with new life. The broken well sang again with the sound of running water, and lanterns flickered in doorways as families gathered to fill their jars. The people moved quietly, their voices hushed, not from fear, but reverence. Something sacred lingered in the air, a peace that reached beyond words. The teacher stood a few paces from the well, watching as the people drew water. His eyes reflected the lantern light, soft and steady. Beside him, a young woman approached, carrying a clay jar that glimmered with cracks filled with gold. She smiled shyly. "Master," she said, "this jar was broken many times. My husband told me to throw it away, but I mended it instead. Tonight, it holds water again." The teacher took the jar gently into his hands. "The Father delights in what is mended," he said. "Every scar, every fracture tells the story of his mercy." He ran his fingers along the golden seams and smiled faintly. "Do you see? What was once broken now shines brighter than before." The woman nodded, her eyes glistening with tears. "I used to thank God only when things were perfect," she whispered. "Now I thank him because they are not. Because even the imperfect has purpose." The teacher looked at her, his voice tender. "Gratitude does not wait for perfection," he said. "It begins where faith remembers." He turned toward the crowd and raised his voice so all could hear. "Gratitude," he said, "is the language heaven understands. It is the song of the soul that knows it has been found." A quiet ripple moved through the people. Some bowed their heads, others clasped their hands. The teacher continued, "When you give thanks, you open the door for peace to enter. A thankful heart sees what others overlook, the miracle in the ordinary, the blessing in the broken." He looked toward the horizon where the first hints of dawn touched the edge of the sky. "There was once a man," he said, "who prayed every day for great miracles. He asked for riches, for signs, for wonders, but none came. One morning he awoke to find his roof leaking, his bread stale, and his clothes torn. In his anger, he cried out to heaven, 'Why have you forgotten me?' And heaven answered, not with thunder, but with a whisper. 'I was in the roof that sheltered you through storms, in the bread that fed you even when it was hard, in the clothes that still covered you though they were worn. You didn't see me because you didn't give thanks.'" The people listened in silence. The teacher's words fell like dew, soft, refreshing, alive. "Gratitude," he said, "is the vision of the heart. It opens your eyes to see the hand of the Father in all things." A fisherman stepped forward, his face worn from years of labor. "But Master," he said, "what of those who have little to be thankful for? What of those who have lost everything?" The teacher looked at him, his expression gentle but unwavering. "He who has breath has reason to give thanks," he said. "For as long as your heart beats, the Father is not finished with you. Gratitude is not for what is gained, it is for what remains." He knelt beside the well again, dipping his hand into the cool water. "Give thanks for the water," he said softly, "not because it quenches thirst, but because it reminds you that you are still alive to drink." The crowd's stillness deepened. In that quiet, gratitude began to bloom, not loud or dramatic, but deep and real. A mother whispered a prayer of thanks over her sleeping child. An old man, once bitter, smiled faintly as he watched his neighbors share food. The sound of quiet joy filled the night like wind through leaves. The teacher stood again, his robe, brushing the ground. When you give thanks, he said, you join heaven's song. For the angels do not praise because they are free from pain. They praise because they see the face of love in all things. He lifted his gaze toward the sky where the first stars began to fade in the growing light. The ungrateful heart builds walls, he said. The grateful heart builds bridges. It connects what was divided. It turns strangers into brothers and sorrow into strength. He turned toward his disciples, who stood close, listening intently. Be thankful, he said, not because life is easy, but because grace is endless. Gratitude turns what you have into enough, and enough into abundance. One of the disciples, John the youngest, spoke softly. Master, he said, if gratitude builds bridges, what do we do with the blessings we receive from them? The teacher looked at him and smiled. You give them away, he said, for thankfulness that stays silent dies in the heart, but gratitude that gives lives. He looked out across the village where the people were now sharing their water freely, filling one another's jars before their own. The thankful soul cannot keep for itself what heaven has given, he said, for gratitude always births generosity. He stepped forward, the early light warming his face, and placed his hand upon the surface of the well. To give thanks, he said, is to remember you were once empty. To give freely is to remember who filled you. The people gathered closer as the light of dawn crept across the land, touching every face, every home, every heart. The teacher's voice softened to a whisper as he said, let your gratitude overflow, and let your giving become its song. He looked toward the open fields beyond the village, where workers had begun to gather, their tools in hand, their laughter rising with the morning sun. His eyes brightened as he spoke again. Now we will see what gratitude becomes when it walks among the living, when it feeds, clothes, and lifts, for love gives thanks and thankfulness gives. And with that, he began to walk toward the workers in the fields, his steps sure and quiet, the sound of the river's song following behind him as the lesson of generosity awaited in the new light of day. The morning light broke across the fields like a soft fire, washing the land in gold. The teacher walked among the workers, the earth beneath their feet still damp from the night's dew. They were harvesting grain, men, women, and even children, each with baskets half full, their laughter rising gently into the open air. The sight brought warmth to the teacher's face. He paused and watched them work for a moment before speaking. The field gives, he said, because it does not keep. The people stopped and turned to listen. His words, though simple, carried a weight that reached the heart. Every stalk that grows here, he continued, rises not for itself, but for others. It gives its fruit, its seed, its shade. The open earth knows what the closed hand forgets, that abundance lives in surrender. He picked a single stalk of grain and rolled it gently between his fingers. This, he said, begins as one seed, but when given to the ground, it becomes a harvest. So it is with your kindness. One act, small, unseen, may feed many long after you have forgotten it. A man stepped forward, wiping sweat from his brow. Teacher, he said, what if one gives and receives nothing in return? What if generosity only leads to loss? The teacher smiled faintly. Then you have given as heaven gives, he said. For love that waits for repayment is not love at all. It is trade. The man frowned. But I am poor, he said. If I give what little I have, how will I live? The teacher's gaze softened. He knelt, picking up a handful of soil, letting it sift through his fingers. The earth does not hold back its richness, he said. It gives itself away, yet it never runs empty. The Father made the heart the same way. The more it gives, the more it becomes. He stood and looked over the field, where sunlight gleamed off the tools and baskets. Let me tell you a story, he said. The workers gathered closer, resting their tools in the soil. The breeze quieted as he began. There was once a merchant, he said, who traveled across the sea seeking fine pearls. He had wealth, yes, but not peace. His heart was heavy with what he owned, for the more he gained, the more he feared to lose. One morning, he came upon a pearl unlike any other. It shimmered with a light that seemed alive, pure, radiant, perfect. The merchant fell to his knees. He had never seen such beauty. But when he asked for its price, he was told, "All that you have." The merchant hesitated. He thought of his house, his gold, his fine clothes. He thought of the comfort they brought him. Yet something deep within whispered, "You will not lose, you will be free." And so he sold everything. His home, his treasures, even the clothes he wore. With trembling hands, he gave all he had and took the pearl. And in that moment, his heart became lighter than it had ever been. He walked the streets with nothing, but within him was peace richer than all his possessions. He had traded wealth for joy and found that what he gained was greater than what he gave. The teacher fell silent for a moment, letting the parable settle into their hearts like seed into soil. A woman spoke softly, almost to herself. "To give everything," she said. "Is that not to lose oneself?" The teacher turned to her, his voice low and gentle. "No," he said. "It is to find yourself. For when your hands are open, they are ready to receive what truly matters." He looked around at them all. "The world teaches you to hold tightly," he said, "to guard, to keep, to hoard. But the Kiti, Father teaches you to release, for only empty hands can catch blessings that fall from heaven." The wind stirred again, rustling through the field. A child who had been listening quietly came forward and offered him a small piece of bread from her basket. "For you, teacher?" she said shyly. The teacher smiled, accepting it with both hands. "This," he said softly, holding up the small piece of bread, "is how heaven multiplies. The kingdom of God begins with hands like hers, open, trusting, willing to give." He broke the bread and shared it with those around him. "You see," he said, "it was never the size of the gift that moved the heart of the Father. It was the heart behind the giving." As they ate, the people began to understand that generosity was not about wealth, but about willingness. They saw that joy came not from possession, but from participation, from joining in the flow of love that moved through all things. When they had finished, the teacher stood once more, brushing the crumbs from his hands. "You have learned to give," he said, "but there is one more lesson yet. Give without pride, for the gift that draws attention to the giver loses its light." He turned his eyes toward the nearby village, where the people were already beginning to speak of his miracles and deeds. His expression grew thoughtful, almost somber. "There are some," he said quietly, "who give with loud hands and hungry hearts. They do not seek to bless. They seek to be seen. But those who give in silence, those who serve unseen, bring joy to the Father." The people listened, their hearts stirred by the depth of his words. The teacher looked back over the shining field and said, "When your right hand gives, let your left hand rest. Let your kindness flow quietly, like water beneath the roots. That is the humility of heaven." The breeze lifted again, carrying the scent of the harvest through the air. The teacher began to walk toward the village, the golden light catching his robe as he moved. "For the greatest giving," he said, "is not found in what the eyes can see, but in the humility of a heart that gives and asks nothing in return." And as the people followed him down the narrow path between the fields, the sound of their laughter and quiet voices faded behind them, replaced by the low hum of gratitude and the soft rhythm of footsteps walking toward the lesson that waited in the next dawn. The afternoon sun hung low above the village square, bathing everything in a golden hush. Dust rose and shimmered in the air as people passed in and out of the temple courtyard, their robes sweeping the ground like whispers. The teacher stood near the entrance, his disciples gathered close, their eyes following the steady flow of worshipers. The air was filled with the clinking of coins as the wealthy came forward. Their robes were fine, their sandals gleamed, and each one carried themselves with the careful pride of being seen. They dropped silver into the temple treasury, loud, ringing, deliberate. Some bowed deeply, others glanced sideways to see who was watching. The teacher watched silently, his hands folded before him. There was no judgment in his face, but neither was there approval. He looked not at their hands, but at their hearts, and what he saw there made his gaze grow distant, thoughtful. Then, amid the noise and movement, a frail woman appeared at the edge of the crowd. Her robe was worn thin, her steps slow and uncertain. In her hand she held 2 tiny copper coins, worth almost nothing, yet held as though they were treasure. She hesitated at the edge of the line, clutching them tightly, her eyes lowered. A merchant behind her frowned impatiently. "Move, woman," he muttered. "Some of us have real offerings to give." She nodded meekly and stepped forward. The teacher watched as she approached the treasury box. Her hands trembled, her face lined with years of struggle. When she dropped the 2 coins in, they made almost no sound, just a faint clink lost beneath the chatter of the rich. But heaven heard it clearly. The teacher's voice broke the hum of the courtyard. "Do you see her?" he asked. The disciples turned, confused. "The old widow?" one said. "Yes," the teacher replied softly. "I tell you truly, she has given more than all the rest." They exchanged puzzled glances. "Master," another said, "how can that be? The others gave gold and silver. She gave 2 coins barely worth a meal." The teacher's gaze remained on the woman as she walked away, unnoticed by those around her. "The others gave from their abundance," he said. "They offered what they would not miss. But she gave all she had to live on. Her hands are empty, yet her heart is full." He stepped closer to the treasury box and placed his hand upon it. Heaven measures not the size of the gift, but the cost of the heart that gives. The people nearby had fallen silent, listening. The merchant who had mocked the widow lowered his eyes, his face flushed with shame. The teacher turned to the crowd. "Some give to be seen," he said, "but the Father sees what is done in secret. He looks not upon the glitter of the coin, but upon the purity of the soul." A small boy, standing near the disciples, spoke timidly. "Master," he asked, "why does the Father love small gifts so much?" The teacher smiled, kneeling so, his eyes met the boy's. "Because," he said, "the greatest gifts are not measured in weight, but in willingness. The world praises what shines. Heaven cherishes what costs." He picked up a small pebble from the ground and held it between his fingers. "To the world, this is nothing," he said. "But to the hand that gives all it has, even this becomes precious." He let the pebble fall and stood again. "The widow's 2 coins," he continued, "were worth more than all the gold poured into the treasury today. For gold fills the box, but love fills the heavens." The disciples stood quietly, their eyes fixed on him. They could feel the truth of his words settle deep within their chests. He looked around the courtyard, watching as people continued to come and go, still giving, still being seen. Yet none carried the quiet dignity of the woman who had given everything in silence. "Do not seek the applause of men," he said, "for their praise fades with the wind. Seek instead the smile of the Father, which never fades." He turned toward the temple steps, his robe brushing against the stones as he began to walk. "There are gifts that glitter," he said, "and gifts that glow. The first shines for a moment, the second lights eternity." As he spoke, the widow had disappeared into the crowd, but her act remained, a small ripple in the sea of eternity. The disciples followed him down the steps, still pondering the depth of his words. The teacher's pace slowed as they reached the edge of the square. He looked up toward the sky, now streaked with amber and rose. "You will not always see the impact of what you give," he said quietly, "but heaven keeps record of every unseen kindness." A soft breeze moved through the courtyard, stirring the dust and lifting the scent of incense into the air. The teacher's eyes softened. Every prayer whispered for another, every meal shared, every act of mercy hidden from the world, it all reaches the Father's heart. "And that," he said, "is the true treasure." The disciples nodded, their faces solemn. One of them murmured, "Then no act of love is ever wasted." The teacher smiled. "None," he said. "Even the smallest kindness can change the course of a soul." He began walking again, the sound of his sandals brushing softly against the stone. The people who had gathered slowly dispersed, carrying his words with them like seeds on the wind. At the far end of the street, a beggar sat alone, shivering in the evening breeze. The teacher's eyes turned toward him. His steps grew slower, and a faint sadness touched his face, not for the beggar's poverty, but for the loneliness that weighed heavier than hunger. He stopped and looked back at his followers. "Come," he said softly. "It is time to show that love is more than giving. It is presence." The disciples followed as he approached the beggar, and the quiet hum of evening gave way to the next lesson, where mercy would take form not in coins or words, but in the gentle nearness of compassion itself. The sun had nearly set when the teacher knelt beside the beggar. The man's clothes were tattered, his skin weathered, his eyes dim with the weight of being unseen. Around them, the village carried on, the clatter of dishes, the laughter of children, the shuffle of sandals against dirt. Yet in that small corner of the street, time seemed to slow. The teacher placed his hand upon the beggar's shoulder. The man flinched at first, unused to touch that carried warmth instead of pity. "Peace to you," the teacher said softly. The beggar blinked, unsure how to respond. "No one greets me that way," he murmured. "They throw me coins to ease their conscience, not to ease my hunger." The teacher looked into his eyes. "The world sees only what is visible," he said, "but the Father rewards what the crowd overlooks." The beggar frowned slightly. "And what does he see in me, Master? I have nothing. I am invisible." "You are seen," the teacher replied, "more than you know. The Father's eyes rest upon those whom the world forgets. He measures not your wealth, but your heart. And though men may pass you by, heaven pauses for you every day." The man's lips trembled. "Then why," he whispered, "does the world not change?" The teacher's voice softened further. "Because the world looks outward, but the Father works inward. He changes hearts before he changes hands. True kindness, the kind that moves mountains, begins where no one sees, within." He took the man's hand, pressing into it a small piece of bread from his cloak. "Do not despise what seems small," he said. "A quiet act done in love outweighs 1,000 loud gestures done for praise." The disciples stood nearby, listening. Their faces reflected the glow of the last rays of sunlight, thoughtful and still. The teacher rose to his feet and turned to them. "You have seen the gifts given in the temple," he said, "and the prayers shouted in the streets. But I tell you this, what is whispered in secret is heard loudest in heaven." He began walking slowly through the street, his voice carrying softly in the cooling air. "When you give," he said, "do not let your left hand know what your right hand has done. When you pray, close the door. When you serve, tell no one. The Father who sees in secret will reward you openly." They passed a group of men boasting loudly about their good deeds, how many they had fed, how much they had donated, how often they fasted. The teacher stopped, listening for a moment before shaking his head. "Their reward," he said quietly, "is already given. For the applause they seek is their payment in full." A woman nearby overheard him and asked, "Then, Master, should we never speak of good things?" He turned toward her, smiling gently. "Speak when it lifts others, not when it lifts yourself," he said. "The fragrance of a flower needs no trumpet to announce its bloom." The woman lowered her gaze, nodding slowly. The teacher continued walking, his sandals brushing against the dirt road. "The heart that acts only when seen," he said, "has not yet known love. But the one who gives unseen, prays unheard, and forgives unpraised, such a heart walks with heaven." He looked back toward the beggar, who now sat quietly, eating the bread he had given him. A faint smile touched the man's face, small but real. The teacher's eyes glimmered with quiet joy. "What is unseen," he said softly, "is eternal." The disciples pondered his words as they walked beside him. One of them, still young in faith, finally spoke. "Master," he said, "how can we live unseen in a world that praises what is seen?" The teacher looked up at the sky, now darkening with twilight. "By seeking a greater witness," he said. "The eyes of men see only the surface, but the eyes of the Father pierce through the soul. When your heart is pure, you will care more for His gaze than for theirs." They reached a quiet stretch of the road where the lamps had not yet been lit. The teacher stopped, motioning toward the shadows cast by the flickering light behind them. "The pure of heart," he said, "shine even in darkness, for their light comes not from others' eyes, but from within. The light born of purity cannot be hidden, for it reflects the very heart of God." He turned to them, his expression peaceful yet firm. Do not perform goodness, become it. Do not seek holiness in the eyes of men, seek it in the stillness of your heart, for when the heart is clean, every action, seen or unseen, becomes sacred. A silence followed. The disciples could feel the truth of his words ripple through them, as though the very air had changed. The teacher looked upon them all, his eyes kind and knowing. Blessed are the pure in heart, he said, for they shall see God. The breeze carried his words through the stillness, stirring the olive trees in the distance. One of the disciples whispered almost in awe, "To see God, is that possible?" The teacher smiled, his gaze lifting toward the heavens, where the first stars were beginning to appear. "Those who are pure in heart," he said softly, "already do." He began walking again, the light of the stars reflecting faintly in his eyes. "Come," he said, "for tonight we speak not of what is hidden from the world, but what must be cleansed within. The eyes see only light, but the heart sees truth, and only a pure heart can bear to see clearly." And so they followed him into the quiet night, their hearts stirred with both fear and wonder, ready to hear what it truly meant to be clean, not in appearance, but in spirit. The moon hung high above the hills, silver light spilling across the quiet path. The teacher walked ahead, his robe catching the glow as the disciples followed behind him in silence. The air was cool and still, the kind of night that pressed the heart to listen. Finally, he stopped beneath a grove of olive trees, their leaves whispering softly in the wind. He turned and looked at them, each face lit by the faint shimmer of moonlight. "Blessed are the pure in heart," he said, his voice low but steady, "for they shall see God." The words lingered in the still air. The disciples shifted uneasily, unsure what he meant. One of them spoke hesitantly. "Master, what does it mean to be pure? No one is without fault. Every heart carries its shadow." The teacher nodded slowly. "Yes," he said, "and yet the Father looks not for hearts without shadow, but hearts without deceit. Purity is not perfection. It is honesty. It is truth when no one is watching." He knelt and picked up a handful of dirt, letting it run between his fingers. "This soil," he said, "is full of stones and roots, but beneath it, life grows. The pure heart is like this. It admits its flaws, yet it allows love to grow through them." Another disciple spoke up. "But Master, how can we keep the heart pure in a world that is unclean? Every day we are tempted by envy, anger, pride." The teacher looked up, his eyes reflecting the light of the stars. "You cannot stop the dust from touching your feet," he said, "but you can choose not to walk in it. The heart that turns again and again toward the Father, even after falling, remains pure. Purity is not never failing. It is never hiding." The disciples listened closely, their faces soft with thought. The teacher continued, "Many wash their hands before they eat, but few wash their hearts before they speak. The lips that bless may also wound, and the eyes that see good may also judge. Purity begins not in the body, but in the soul." He rose and began to walk slowly through the grove, the leaves rustling gently as he passed. "When your heart is pure," he said, "you will see the world differently. You will see the face of God not only in heaven, but in the faces of those around you. The poor, the broken, the forgotten, all bear the reflection of the one who made them." He stopped near a small pool of water, its surface still and clear. The moon shone upon it, a perfect reflection. The teacher pointed to it. "The heart is like this water," he said. "When it is clean, it reflects heaven. But when anger stirs it, when lies muddy it, the reflection is lost. The Father does not demand a spotless mirror, only one willing to be cleared." A gentle silence settled over them. The disciples stared at the water, each man seeing his own reflection ripple under the wind. The teacher's voice softened. "Some will appear righteous, yet their hearts are hollow. They wear purity as a robe, but inside they are restless. They seek the approval of men, not the gaze of God. But the one who seeks no praise, who loves quietly, who forgives without being asked, such a one sees the Father in every sunrise." He turned to them again, his eyes steady and kind. "Guard your hearts," he said, "for from them flow the springs of life. What you feed will grow. Feed envy, and your heart will harden. Feed forgiveness, and it will become flesh again." A soft wind blew through the grove, scattering a few leaves across their feet. The teacher closed his eyes for a moment, breathing deeply. "The pure heart does not boast of purity," he said. "It simply remains open. It grieves for what is evil, rejoices for what is good, and stays gentle even when the world is cruel." One of the younger disciples whispered, "Master, have you ever seen a heart that pure?" The teacher smiled faintly, a glimmer of sorrow in his eyes. "Yes," he said. "I see it in the ones who forgive when they are wronged. I see it in mothers who still pray for their lost children. I see it in those who keep kindness alive, even when no one returns it." He lifted his gaze toward the stars. "The Father dwells close to the pure in heart because he recognizes himself in them." They stood in silence, their eyes following his to the sky. The moon had shifted higher, casting the grove in softer light. The teacher looked back to them, his tone quieter now. "When you are pure in heart," he said, "peace will follow you. Not peace from the world, but peace within it. The heart at rest sees clearly. It fears nothing, envies nothing, desires only what is true." The disciples nodded slowly, their breaths even, their minds turning inward. The teacher placed his hand upon his chest and said, "Do not seek purity by escaping the world. Seek it by walking through it with clean hands and a faithful heart. For even among the noise, even among the broken, peace will bloom where the heart is still." He stepped back onto the path, the olive branches swaying lightly above him. The night carried the scent of earth and wind, cool against their faces. "Come," he said quietly. "The heart that is pure knows peace, but peace is not found by chance. It is learned, lived, and chosen." As they began to walk once more, the moon followed their steps, spilling its silver light over the hilltop. The teacher's shadow stretched before them, long and sure. And in that gentle stillness, the disciples knew they were being led not just toward peace in the world around them, but toward the peace that begins in the hidden places of the heart. The first light of morning broke over the hills, soft and golden, touching every blade of grass with warmth. The teacher sat upon a flat stone overlooking the valley below, where the mist still lingered like a veil. His disciples gathered close, wrapped in their cloaks, quiet as the day began. The air smelled of dew and olive leaves, fresh and clean. He looked upon them and said, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God." The words rested upon the air like the morning light, gentle yet full of weight. The disciples exchanged looks, uncertain. One finally asked, "Master, how can a man bring peace when the world loves war?" The teacher smiled faintly, his eyes thoughtful. "Peace," he said, "is not the absence of conflict. It is the courage to mend what conflict has broken. The one who seeks peace must walk into the storm, not away from it." He looked toward the valley where farmers could be seen at work, their voices carrying faintly on the wind. "There are two kinds of silence," he continued. "One is born from wisdom, and the other from fear. Many call it peace when they avoid confrontation, but that is not peace, it is escape. True peace does not flee, it restores." The disciples listened, their faces turned toward him, the wind brushing softly through their hair. "Peace," he said, "is not made by the sword or the throne. It is made when one heart forgives another, when pride bows to love, and when mercy is stronger than anger." He turned his gaze upon one of them, Simon the Zealot, whose hands had once gripped blades instead of prayer. "Tell me," the teacher asked, "what victory comes from hatred?" Simon's eyes fell. "None that lasts, Master." The teacher nodded gently. "Hatred wins the moment, but loses the soul. Peace may seem slow, but it endures. A man who chooses peace chooses the heart of the Father." He rose, stepping down from the stone and onto the soft earth. "Come," he said, "let me show you." They followed him into the valley, where two men stood arguing over a broken wall that divided their fields. The air between them crackled with tension. One shouted accusations of theft, the other of deceit. The teacher approached silently until both men noticed him. They fell quiet, unsure whether to bow or continue. "Why do you quarrel?" the teacher asked. This man moved his boundary stones, one said bitterly. He took a strip of land that has belonged to my family for generations. The other crossed his arms. I moved nothing. The floods washed the markers away. He accuses me unjustly. The teacher looked between them. Each of you speaks truth from your own eyes, he said, but truth seen through anger is no longer clear. He knelt beside the broken wall, placing his hand on the damp soil. This earth, he said, belongs to neither of you. It belongs to the Father who made it. You are stewards, not owners. What is gained by fighting over dust that will one day cover you both? The two men lowered their eyes, the weight of his words falling heavy. The teacher stood and looked at them kindly. You both desire justice, he said. But peace is the highest form of justice. It restores not the land, but the heart. He reached into the soil, pressing his hand into the soft mud, then placed his palm upon the broken stones. If you wish to be sons of God, you must build again what has been broken. Not this wall, but the friendship that once stood in its place. For a moment, there was silence. Then one of the men stepped forward, extending his hand to the other. Let us rebuild, he said. The teacher's eyes brightened. Now you have found peace, not by being right, but by being merciful. The disciples watched, their hearts stirred. One whispered, Master, if peace means surrendering pride, few will ever find it. The teacher turned to him and said, Few do. That is why the peacemakers are called the children of God. They do what few have the courage to do. They heal where others hurt. They give when others demand. He walked to the nearby stream, washing the mud from his hands. The water shimmered in the light, flowing gently around his fingers. You cannot hold peace, he said softly. You can only live it. It moves like this river, steady, quiet, patient. When you live at peace within, even those at war around you will feel its current. He stood again and looked toward the hills where the sunlight had now touched every field. The world will always find reasons to divide, he said. Nation against nation, man against brother, heart against heart, but the one who brings peace brings heaven closer to earth. The disciples followed his gaze, the truth of his words settling in their spirits like a seed ready to grow. The teacher looked back at them, his voice deepening. But to bring peace, he said, you must first forgive. For no one can carry both peace and bitterness in the same heart. One must die for the other to live. The disciples fell silent. They knew what was coming. Forgiveness, again. The hardest command, the one that tore at pride and demanded surrender. The teacher began to walk slowly along the riverbank, the reflection of the water shimmering across his robe. To forgive, he said quietly, is not to forget the wound. It is to release the poison. He stopped, turning to them once more, the light of the rising sun framing his face. A heart that refuses to forgive cannot carry peace, and a soul that makes peace must learn to forgive again and again, until the heart no longer remembers why it was angry. He looked at them each in turn, his eyes full of both challenge and compassion. Come, he said softly, for there is one more lesson to learn. The work of peace begins within, but it is forgiveness that keeps it alive. And so, with the sound of running water beside them and the dawn breaking open above, they followed him once more, toward the place where peace and forgiveness would meet like heaven touching the earth. The morning sky was pale and wide as the teacher and his followers entered a small village resting along the valley road. The streets were quiet, the kind of stillness that came after many seasons of sorrow. There were broken fences, empty stalls, and a silence that carried more than fatigue. It carried regret. The teacher stopped near the entrance, where an old man sat beside a half-mended gate. His face was lined with waiting. His hands, rough and calloused, rested on his knees as if they'd forgotten how to work but not how to hope. When the teacher's shadow crossed his feet, the old man looked up. Their eyes met, and something in that gaze, something wordless, passed between them. Peace to you, the teacher said. The old man's lips trembled. Peace? He repeated softly. Peace left my house long ago. The teacher sat beside him, and the disciples gathered quietly in the shade. Tell me, the teacher said, what has been lost? The man looked toward the horizon, where the hills stretched into the light. My son, he said, his voice cracked and fragile. He left with my inheritance, with my trust, and with my pride. I warned him, but he did not listen. I told myself he would return quickly. But the seasons have passed, and still I wait. The teacher nodded slowly, his eyes kind but searching. Do you love him still? The old man turned, his eyes welling with tears. How could I not? He is my blood, my joy, my foolish child. But love is a wound that never closes, Master. It aches with every sunrise. The teacher placed a hand on his shoulder. Then your heart is not broken. It is alive. The old man blinked, confused. Alive? Yes, the teacher said softly. A dead heart feels nothing. But the one that loves, even through pain, carries the pulse of heaven within it. The disciples leaned closer, knowing the teacher was about to speak in parable. His voice lowered, steady and full of grace. There was once a father who had 2 sons, he began. The younger came one day and said, Father, give me my share of the inheritance now. And though it broke his heart, the father divided his wealth and gave it freely. The son took all he had and went far away. He lived as though tomorrow would never come. He wasted his gold on comfort, his strength on pleasure, and his soul on pride. Soon his coins were gone, and so were his friends. Hunger found him, and shame became his companion. One morning, he woke in the company of swine, starving, broken, and alone. He looked at the husks the pigs ate and longed for even that. Then he said to himself, Even my father's servants have bread enough and to spare. I will go home, not as a son, but as a servant. I will tell my father I am no longer worthy to be his child. The teacher paused. The crowd around him had grown. Villagers had begun to gather, drawn by the calm power of his words. So the son rose and began the long walk home, the teacher continued. He rehearsed his apology with every step, but while he was still far off, his father saw him, and before the son could take another step, the father ran to him. The old man beside him was weeping now, his shoulders shaking. The teacher's voice softened further. The father fell upon his son's neck and kissed him. The boy began to speak, saying, Father, I have sinned. But the father silenced him. Bring the robe, he cried. Bring the ring, bring the sandals. My son who was lost is found, my child who was dead is alive again. And there was music and laughter and a feast, for love had triumphed over distance, and mercy had silenced shame. The teacher turned his gaze upon the old man, whose tears now flowed freely down his cheeks. You see, he said gently, the Father does not wait. Behind locked doors, he runs to meet the lost before they can speak their regret. The old man's breath hitched. Do you think he will come back? The teacher smiled, faint but certain. The road that leads away always remembers how to return. The old man looked toward the horizon once more. His lips parted, and for the first time in years, a flicker of hope crossed his face. Then I will wait, he said, his voice trembling with faith. And when I see him, I will run. The teacher nodded. And heaven will run with you. As they rose to leave, the crowd was quiet. No one wanted to disturb the peace that had settled over the place. The old man stood, straighter than before, his eyes bright with new strength. The teacher's words lingered like the scent of rain after drought. The disciples followed him back toward the road. Master, one of them said softly, you speak of the Father's joy. But what of the Son's shame? How can one who has fallen so low ever walk back with dignity? The teacher's eyes glowed in the warm light of morning. When love meets repentance, he said, shame loses its voice. They walked on, the sounds of the village fading behind them. Somewhere, faintly, came the sound of laughter, the laughter of a father whose heart had begun to heal. The teacher's steps slowed, his expression calm but radiant. The Father rejoices more for one who returns, he said, than for 99 who never wandered. For love does not count the distance, it celebrates the return. The wind carried his words across the fields, mingling with the scent of harvest and the sound of children's laughter nearby. The disciples felt a warmth grow within them, the kind that could only come from joy too deep to name. The teacher turned toward the direction of the laughter, his eyes soft with peace. "Come," he said quietly, "for there is joy waiting to be shared, joy that teaches the heart to sing." And they followed him once more, toward the place where the sound of rejoicing would soon rise like sunlight breaking through the clouds. The day had grown long, the sun leaning westward, its light softening into shades of amber and rose. The teacher and his followers reached a hillside where wildflowers grew among the rocks. The air was still, carrying the faint hum of distant cicadas and the scent of ripened grain. There was peace, but also a quiet heaviness in the disciples' hearts. They had seen suffering on their journey, faces worn by grief, homes marked by absence, hearts heavy with loss. The teacher sat upon a large stone overlooking the valley and waited until the breeze stilled. Then he spoke, his voice calm, yet carrying the ache of eternity. "You have heard me speak of peace," he said, "and you have seen the joy of those who are healed and forgiven. But now you must understand joy that is not born of laughter, joy that endures through sorrow." The disciples sat, close, the weight of his tone drawing them near. He looked at each of them slowly, his gaze resting on the one who had lost a brother, on another whose family had turned him away for following him. "There are two kinds of joy," he continued, "the joy the world gives and the joy heaven gives. The first is loud. It rises with comfort, with plenty, with moments that fade. But the second," his voice lowered, soft as the wind moving through grass. "The second joy is quiet. It grows not from what is gained, but from what is surrendered." A long silence followed. Even the insects seemed to pause. The teacher plucked a wildflower from the earth and held it between his fingers. "You see this flower?" he asked. "It blooms brightly, but its beauty is not its strength. Its strength is in the root, buried, unseen, holding fast through rain and wind. When the petals fall, the root remains, and in time it blooms again." He looked up at them. "So it is with the soul that trusts the Father. Even when all beauty seems to fade, the root of faith remains, and from it grows joy that sorrow cannot uproot." One of the disciples spoke hesitantly. "Master, how can we rejoice in pain? How can the heart find gladness when it bleeds?" The teacher set the flower gently upon the stone. "Because pain is not the end. It is the turning of the soil. Sorrow softens the ground of the heart so that love may take deeper root. Without the storm, the soil would remain hard, and no new life could grow." He looked out toward the valley, where farmers worked in the distance, their fields glowing beneath the afternoon light. "When a seed is buried," he said, "it is hidden in darkness. But that darkness is not its death. It is the beginning of its rising." The disciples followed his gaze, understanding dawning slowly. The teacher continued, "So too must you endure your sorrows. Let them break the ground within you, for from the brokenness, heaven's joy will spring forth." A woman from the nearby village approached quietly, her eyes red from weeping. She knelt before him, clutching a small cloth in her hands. "Teacher," she said, her voice trembling, "my child is gone. How can I speak of joy when my arms are empty?" The teacher looked at her with a gentleness that could calm storms. He took her hands, the cloth between them. "The Father does not take away to punish," he said softly. "He calls home what was always his. The love you gave your child was not lost. It has returned to the one who first gave it." Her tears fell freely, yet she did not pull away. The teacher continued, "Love is not buried with the body. It breathes still in heaven and in you. One day, what is separated by sorrow will be joined again in joy." Placed his hand upon her heart. "Until then, let your grief be prayer. Let every tear you shed water the roots of your faith, for even in the falling leaf, life begins again." The woman nodded, slowly, clutching the cloth to her chest. Her tears did not stop, but her breathing softened. The peace that filled her face was not the peace of forgetting. It was the peace of believing. As she rose to leave, the teacher watched her go. "This," he said to his disciples, "is joy that sorrow cannot steal. It does not come from ease, but from endurance. It is the joy that trusts there is meaning in the pain and dawn after every night. The light began to fade, the sky painted in hues of crimson and gold. The disciples sat in silence, feeling something deep and unspoken awaken within them. The teacher stood and looked toward the horizon. "The Father's joy is not laughter without tears," he said. "It is hope that sings even through them." They began to walk again, the air cooler now, the scent of earth rich after the day's warmth. The teacher's steps were unhurried, his eyes fixed on the fading light ahead. "Do not fear sorrow," he said softly. "It is the shadow cast by love. And the deeper the love, the brighter the joy that follows." The valley below glowed faintly beneath the evening sky, and the first stars began to appear. The teacher's voice dropped to a whisper as they descended the hill. "Soon," he said, "you will see joy born from the deepest loss, the kind that only heaven can give, the kind that turns mourning into song." And as the sun disappeared beyond the mountains, his shadow lengthened before them, leading the way toward the lesson that would test not only their hearts, but their faith in life beyond the sorrow of the world. The path led them to a forest blanketed in late autumn gold. Every step was soft beneath their feet, the air filled with the rustle of falling leaves. The trees stood tall and bare in places, their branches stretching toward the fading sky as if in quiet prayer. The teacher stopped beneath one of the largest oaks, his eyes following a single leaf as it drifted gently toward the earth. He waited until it landed, then spoke. "Do you see how it falls?" His voice was calm, but it carried through the hush like a slow wind through reeds. It does not fight the air, nor does it cling to the branch that once held it. It surrenders to the season, and in that surrender, it fulfills its purpose. The disciples gathered close, the sound of their sandals muffled by the fallen leaves. One of them, Matthew, bent down to pick up the leaf. "But Master," he said softly, "it dies." The teacher nodded. "So it seems," he said. "But tell me, does the tree mourn?" Matthew looked confused. "Should it not? It has lost part of itself." The teacher smiled faintly. "The tree does not weep, for it knows the truth. The leaf is not gone. It has returned to the earth that fed it, to give life again. What falls in one season rises in another." A silence settled around them. The forest seemed to breathe with them, alive and listening. The teacher knelt, pressing his hand gently against the soil. "The Father writes this lesson into all things," he said. "In the falling leaf, in the ebb of the tide, in the setting sun. Death is not the end. It is the doorway through which life renews itself." Peter's brow furrowed. "But Master, when someone we love is taken from us, it feels like loss, the pain. It doesn't feel like renewal." The teacher's gaze met his, full of compassion. "Pain is the cry of love remembering," he said. "You feel loss because you have known connection. That ache, that hollow place, is proof that love once dwelled there. But love cannot die, Peter. It changes form as the leaf becomes part of the earth." He picked up the fallen leaf and held it in his palm. "What you call death is only transformation. The leaf becomes soil, the soil feeds the roots, and from those roots new life emerges. So too with the soul, it leaves the body to return to the source, that others might live through the grace it once carried." John, the youngest among them, spoke quietly. "So, when we die, we go back to the Father?" The teacher nodded. "You never left him. You simply forgot the way home. Death reminds the soul of its true direction." A gentle breeze stirred the forest, sending a soft shower of leaves fluttering down. The teacher raised his eyes to the canopy, watching the sky flicker between branches. "The Father does not call his children to the dark," he said, "but to the dawn beyond it. To the world, the falling leaf is an ending, but to heaven, it is a homecoming." The disciples stood in thoughtful silence. Some looked to the sky, others watched the leaves gather at their feet. The teacher rose and brushed the dirt from his hands. "The world fears what it does not understand," he said. "But the one who trusts the Father does not fear death, for they know it is the passage into eternal life." He stepped forward and laid his hand upon the trunk of the great oak. Even this tree knows its time, he said. Its branches grow heavy, its leaves fade, and yet it stands in peace. It does not resist the cycle, it honors it. He turned back to them. You must learn the same peace, to accept the seasons of life without clinging to what must pass. The Father wastes nothing, not joy, not sorrow, not even the breath that leaves your lips. All returns to him, transformed. A long quiet followed. The forest whispered as though repeating his words. Then the teacher smiled softly. One day, he said, each of you will face the season of falling. But if your heart trusts the giver of life, you will not fall into nothingness, you will fall into his hands. The disciples' eyes glistened. Even those who did not speak understood that he was preparing them for something deeper, something that went beyond this world. He stooped once more and gathered several fallen leaves into his hands. These, he said, once danced in the wind, drank the sun, and sheltered the young. Now, though they rest upon the ground, their work continues. They feed what will bloom next spring. He let them slip from his hands, scattering softly over the soil. Do not grieve what has fallen. Give thanks that it lived. As he spoke, the breeze lifted again, carrying with it the sound of branches creaking above, a low, living hymn of nature itself. The teacher began to walk, and the disciples followed, their feet brushing through the leaves. The light of the setting sun pierced through the trees, wrapping them all in gold. Every ending, he said quietly, is the root of something eternal. What the world buries, heaven resurrects. The air seemed to still at his words, the hush of creation itself leaning in. The teacher's eyes turned toward the distant horizon, where the first stars began to pierce the twilight. His tone softened as he spoke once more. The Father has written eternity into every falling leaf, he said. And for those who believe, the promise is this: what falls shall rise again. They continued walking until the forest began to open and the golden light gave way to the deep blue of evening. The teacher's voice was the last sound that carried through the trees, steady, sure, and filled with quiet joy. For the heart that trusts, he said, death is not the end of the song, it is only the pause before the music begins anew. Ahead, the forest gave way to open fields. In the distance, the faint glow of lamps flickered in a small village, the next place where hope would find its voice again. Night had fallen by the time they reached the open fields beyond the forest. The stars shimmered like countless lamps across the sky, steady and sure. A faint breeze stirred the tall grass, carrying with it the scent of earth and dew. The teacher walked at the front, his steps unhurried, his face calm. The disciples followed, weary but silent, each lost in thought. They came upon a fig tree standing alone at the edge of the field. Its branches were bare, its fruit long gone, yet its roots clung deep within the soil. The teacher stopped before it, resting his hand upon its trunk. "Do you see this tree?" he asked. Peter nodded. "It looks dead, Master." The teacher smiled faintly. "Only to the eyes," he said. "Its life is not gone, it is waiting. What you cannot see is what sustains it. Beneath the ground, the roots still draw life from the earth. Hope is like that. It does not always bloom where others can see it. It endures in silence." He stepped back, gazing up at the barren branches that reached toward the night sky. "Many lose hope when they see no fruit," he continued. "They mistake waiting for abandonment. But the Father is not absent in stillness. The root must rest before it grows again." The disciples stood quietly, the soft wind brushing through their cloaks. Andrew spoke after a moment. "Master, what of those who have lost all? Faith? Those whose roots have withered completely?" The teacher looked at him gently. "No root planted by heaven truly dies," he said. "It may sleep. It may hide beneath the cold of doubt. But even in the deepest frost, the Father whispers life back into it." He crouched and pressed his hand into the soil at the base of the tree. "The ground may seem barren," he said, "but beneath it is a world unseen. Roots intertwine, feed one another, share their strength. So too with those who love. When one heart falters, another's faith sustains it." He looked up, his eyes catching the starlight. Hope is not a solitary thing. It is a vine that grows stronger when it is shared. John, who had been quiet, knelt beside him. "But Master," he said, "how do we keep hope when the world grows darker, when our prayers seem unanswered?" The teacher placed his hand upon the young disciple's shoulder. "When the night deepens, hope is not lost. It is tested. You do not learn trust in the light, but in the dark. The seed must go beneath the soil before it can reach for the sun." He rose, brushing the dirt from his hands. "The Father does not forget his promises," he said. "Hope planted in faith will always bear fruit in time. You may not see the harvest, but it will come." The disciples watched him closely, their hearts quiet. Around them, the night was alive with sound, the rustling of grass, the chirping of crickets, the whisper of wind. The teacher's voice blended with it all, gentle but filled with power. "Do not despise the waiting," he said, "for it is in waiting that roots grow deep. If the Father gave you everything at once, your heart would never learn endurance." He moved to sit upon a stone nearby, the starlight haloing his figure. "Hope," he said softly, "is not a wish. It is the certainty that light will return. Even when the eyes see only darkness, the soul remembers the dawn." A long silence followed. The disciples seemed to breathe in his words, as if taking strength from them. The teacher glanced toward the horizon where the faintest silver of moonlight touched the distant hills. "The Father has placed eternity within your hearts," he said. "That is why you long for what you cannot yet see. Hope is the echo of heaven calling you home." He turned back to the barren tree and smiled. "The roots know what the branches forget. The spring always comes. Even when frost grips the earth, life stirs beneath." He rose again, his robe catching the wind. "Let your hope be like the root, unseen but unshaken. When storms tear the branches, when the world mocks your faith, stand firm beneath the soil of trust." The disciples followed his gaze toward the tree, their faces lit by the glow of the stars. The teacher's expression was serene, but his words carried quiet strength. "The world may cut you down," he said, "but it cannot reach what the Father has planted within you. That root belongs to eternity." He looked at them each in turn, his eyes calm, his tone soft as a prayer. "And when despair whispers that all is lost, remember this: the same hand that planted you in love will raise you in glory." The breeze grew cooler, moving through the grass like a sigh. The teacher stepped away from the tree, his shadow long beneath the moonlight. Peter spoke quietly, almost to himself. "Then hope is not something we hold. It is something that holds us." The teacher smiled. "Yes," he said, "hope is the root of faith, and faith is the root of life. Together, they anchor the soul in the soil of heaven." He looked once more at the tree, then toward the winding path that disappeared into the hills beyond. "Come," he said softly, his voice carrying through the stillness. "For the roots of hope must lead to endurance. It is not enough to believe. You must learn to keep believing when belief feels heavy." The disciples gathered their cloaks and followed him into the night, the soft rhythm of their steps blending with the rustling grass. Above them, the stars seemed closer, brighter, as though heaven itself leaned near to listen. And as they walked, the teacher's voice carried on the wind. "The storm will come again, the earth will shake, but the tree that is rooted in hope will not fall. It will bend and rise stronger." The moon guided them onward, its light tracing the narrow path toward the mountains ahead, where the lessons of endurance awaited them in the quiet dawn yet to come. The path wound upward through the rocky hills, rough and uneven beneath their feet. The wind was colder here, sharper against the skin, carrying the scent of dust and distance. The teacher walked ahead, steady and unhurried, his robe brushing against the stones. Behind him, the disciples followed, their breaths growing heavier, their steps slower. They had walked far, through hunger, through long nights, through storms. But this climb felt different. It was quieter, heavier somehow, as though the earth itself were testing their resolve. At last, Peter spoke, his voice low but edged with fatigue. "Master," he said, "how much farther must we go?" The teacher stopped and looked back, his gaze soft but firm. "Farther than your strength," he said, "but not farther than your faith." The words settled into the air, both comfort and challenge. The disciples said nothing, but their faces told the truth. Some were weary, others frustrated, and a few quietly afraid that they could not go on. The teacher turned his eyes toward the distant horizon. "The Father does not ask for swiftness," he said. "He asks for endurance. The road to heaven is not climbed by the strong, but by the faithful." He began walking again, and they followed, though their legs trembled. Each step felt heavier than the last. The sun sinking low behind the mountains threw long shadows across the path. Andrew stumbled and caught himself against a rock. "Master," he said breathlessly, "why must the way be so hard? If the Father desires us to reach him, why not make the road smooth?" The teacher stopped once more and turned to face them. "If the road were easy," he said, "you would walk it without me." They fell silent. The wind brushed past, cool and relentless, whispering through the cracks in the stone. "The heart grows only through resistance," he continued. "A tree does not deepen its roots in calm weather, but in the storm. You learn endurance not by resting, but by pressing on." He looked at their tired faces and added gently, "Each of you carries a burden unseen. The Father knows it. He allows the climb not to crush you, but to strengthen what is eternal in you." They resumed their walk, the sound of sandals against stone echoing faintly through the hills. As they climbed higher, the stars began to appear, first one, then many. The light of the heavens shimmered above them, distant but constant. At last, they came to a small ridge overlooking a wide valley bathed in silver moonlight. The teacher sat upon a large rock, his robe gathering around him like a soft flame in the wind. The disciples sank to the ground, exhausted. He waited until their breathing slowed, then said, "Blessed are those who do not turn away in weariness." The words were quiet, but they cut through the night like light through fog. "The weary heart," he said, "is the one that wrestles most with faith, but it is also the one that heaven holds dearest. When you are tired, when the world feels heavy, and you still take one more step, that step is a prayer more powerful than 1,000 spoken words." He looked at Thomas, whose shoulders sagged beneath invisible weight. Even doubt, when carried forward, becomes endurance. For it takes greater faith to walk with questions than to stand still with certainty. A hush fell over them. The teacher lifted his eyes toward the stars. "Do not think endurance means the absence of pain," he said. "Endurance is faith that breathes even when the air is thin. It is love that refuses to die even when it is not returned." He rose to his feet and gestured toward the valley below. "The Father measures your journey not by the distance you walk, but by the devotion with which you rise each time you fall. The crown of life is not given to the fastest or the strongest, but to those who do not turn back when the road grows long." John, his voice faint, asked, "But Master, what if we falter? What if our strength fails before the end?" The teacher smiled, stepping closer. "Then I will carry you," he said simply. "For the one who endures in love does not walk alone." A deep stillness followed. The night air grew colder, but within them stirred something warm and steady, a fire that did not burn bright, yet refused to go out. They understood now that endurance was not a matter of the body, but of the heart. The teacher looked upon them with quiet pride. "Rest when you must," he said softly, "but never stop believing. For faith is not the finish line. It is the footsteps that keep moving when all else has failed." He walked a few paces away, the stars reflecting in his eyes. "When you grow weary, lift your eyes to the heavens," he said. "For the same God who placed those stars above you watches every step beneath you. Each breath you take in trust, each moment you endure without giving up, writes his glory upon your soul." The disciples sat in silence, the sound of the wind their only companion. Their exhaustion had not vanished, but something in them had shifted. They were still weary, but no longer hopeless. The teacher turned to look back once more, his voice gentle. "Endurance is the strength of those who wait for morning," he said, "and morning always comes." He lifted his hand toward the horizon, where a faint silver began to glow behind the dark ridges of the mountains. The first light of dawn touched the sky. "Do you see?" he whispered. "The night never wins." The disciples rose slowly, feeling the warmth of the coming day. The teacher began walking again, his steps quiet, steady, unwavering. And as they followed, the faint light spread across the hills, revealing the narrow road ahead. It wound onward, uncertain, steep, and long. But in their hearts, something stronger than fear had begun to grow. The teacher's voice carried softly through the rising wind. Now, keep watch, for the one who endures must also learn to see. And with that, the new day began to break over the mountains. The sky was still dim when the teacher stopped upon the ridge. The valley below was wrapped in a blue-gray mist, soft and cold, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The disciples stood beside him, their cloaks drawn close against the morning air. None spoke. The silence felt sacred, like the moment between heartbeats. The teacher's eyes were fixed on the horizon. "The night is nearly spent," he said quietly, "and the dawn is nearer than you think." His words stirred them. The disciples followed his gaze, but the horizon was still dark. "Master," James said, "we see no light yet, only the shadows." The teacher turned to him, his face calm and steady. "The light comes not when you see it," he said, "but when you believe it is coming. Faith keeps watch when sight grows weary." He looked out once more, the wind lifting his hair. "The Father calls you to be watchers," he continued, "those who stand when others sleep, who hold the lamp of hope when others let theirs go out." A faint orange glow began to touch the clouds in the distance. It was small, barely a whisper of color, but the teacher's face warmed at the sight. "Be like those who wait for the morning," he said softly, "not with impatience, but with readiness. The dawn always comes to those who do not leave their post." Andrew looked toward the horizon, shivering slightly. "Master," he asked, "how do we keep watch when our hearts grow tired?" The teacher's gaze remained on the sky. "You keep watch not with your eyes, but with your heart," he said. "To watch is to live aware, to see the divine in every moment, to hear the whisper of heaven in the ordinary. The one who keeps watch does not fear the dark, for he knows it cannot last." He turned to them, his voice firm but filled with peace. "The world sleeps in forgetfulness," he said. "Men chase after dreams of gold, of power, of praise. But blessed are the watchers, for their treasure is eternal. While others slumber in comfort, they remain awake in purpose." The wind carried the sound of rustling leaves through the valley below. The teacher gestured toward the faint glow growing stronger on the horizon. "This," he said, "is what the faithful heart looks like. It may seem small, but even the smallest light breaks the hold of darkness." John, the youngest, whispered, "Master, is this what you mean when you speak of your return?" The teacher smiled gently, but there was a sadness in his eyes. "Yes," he said. "One day the dawn will not fade into another day, but into eternity. The Son of Man will come as surely as the sun rises, but no one knows the hour. So keep watch, not in fear, but in love." He moved toward a cluster of stones and sat upon one, the disciples gathering around him. "There were 10 maidens," he began, his voice soft storytelling once more. "They went out to meet the bridegroom, each carrying a lamp. 5 were wise and brought oil, 5 were foolish and did not. The night grew long, and all grew weary. When the call came, 'The bridegroom is here.' Only those whose lamps still burned were ready to enter." He looked at each of them in turn. "Do you understand? The lamp is your faith, the oil your devotion. Keep your lamp burning, even when the night seems endless." The disciples nodded slowly, the parable settling deep in their hearts. Peter spoke quietly. "So we must live each day as though the dawn were near." The teacher's eyes brightened. "Yes," he said. "Live ready. Forgive quickly. Love deeply. Give freely. For the dawn belongs to those whose hearts remain awake." He stood and walked to the edge of the ridge, looking down at the mist-shrouded valley. "The world will mock the watchers," he said. "They will say, 'Where is the promise of his coming?' But do not lose heart, for the sun delays only to teach patience, and the Father's mercy waits for every soul that still wanders in the dark. The light grew stronger now, washing the valley in soft gold. The teacher turned, the rising sun illuminating his face. "Look," he said, smiling. "The dawn does not shout when it arrives. It comes gently, faithfully, as it has since the beginning. So too will the kingdom come, not in chaos, but in quiet glory." The disciples shielded their eyes from the brightness. The warmth touched their skin, and they felt as though something unseen had awakened within them. Hope renewed, faith rekindled. The teacher spoke once more, his voice steady as the light that broke through the mist. "You are the watchers of the dawn," he said. "The world may sleep, but you will remain awake. Let your lives be the lamp that reminds others the sun still rises." He stepped closer to them, his presence radiant in the golden light. "Hold to what is good. Guard your hearts from fear. When you grow weary, remember the promise. The morning always follows the night. Always." The wind quieted, and for a moment, all they could hear was the slow heartbeat of the earth waking beneath the sun. The teacher lifted his face toward the light, eyes closed, as if listening to something beyond the world. And then softly he said, "Now, go and gather those who still sleep. Call them to rise, for the day has begun." He turned toward the path that led down into the valley, his robe catching the light as he walked. The disciples followed, their shadows stretching long behind them, their hearts burning with quiet purpose. In the distance, the village roofs gleamed under the morning sun. The people were beginning to stir, unaware that the watcher himself was walking toward them, ready to awaken them to a light brighter than any dawn. The day had reached its stillest hour. The sun hung low, its light breaking through the branches like thin streams of gold. The teacher sat beneath the great sycamore where he had spoken many times before. Around him, the people gathered, farmers with worn hands, children with eyes wide as dawn, the weary, the curious, the broken. The air carried the scent of soil and leaves, of smoke from distant hearths. Before him lay the old scroll, its edges frayed by time and touch. He unrolled it slowly, reverently, as though opening the heart of heaven itself. The people quieted. Even the wind seemed to hush in respect. He began to read. "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me." His voice rose, strong yet tender. "Because he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to proclaim liberty to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind." The words lingered in the air like light that refused to fade. The teacher's eyes moved across the faces before him. The widow clutching her last coin, the beggar who had once been blind, the boy who had returned home after wandering far. Each one was still, listening as though their own names were written in the text. When he finished, he rolled the scroll closed and laid it gently on his lap. His hands rested upon it, silent for a long moment. "This," he said at last, his voice quiet yet carrying to the edges of the crowd, "has been fulfilled among you." The people stirred, whispers rising like wind through dry grass. "Fulfilled?" someone murmured. "How?" The teacher's eyes lifted toward the heavens, where the clouds blushed with the color of evening. "Because the kingdom has already begun," he said. "Not in palaces, not in temples, but here." He touched his chest, then pointed to the people. "In hearts that have chosen love over fear." A child stepped forward timidly, offering a small flower she had plucked from the ground. The teacher smiled and accepted it, holding it up for all to see. "The kingdom of God," he said, "is like this flower. It seems small, fragile, and easily crushed, but look closer. It grows even in the cracks of stone." He handed the flower back to the child. "When you choose mercy, when you forgive, when you love those who cannot repay you, you make the kingdom bloom again." The crowd listened, some with tears, others with awe. The teacher's voice softened. "You have heard the words of heaven. Now you must become them. The scroll is not meant to be kept on the shelf. It is meant to live in you." A murmur spread through the people, and one man stood. "Master," he said, his voice trembling, "you speak as if you will leave us. Will you not stay and teach us more?" The teacher looked at him with infinite kindness. I have taught you enough to begin, he said. The rest you will learn by walking in what you have heard. The truth grows deeper only when lived. He rose to his feet. The crowd parted as he stood, the scroll still in his hand. Do not look for me in the places I have stood, he said. Look for me in the hearts that love as I have loved, for where compassion abides, there I remain. The wind stirred again, scattering leaves around him like whispers of farewell. The teacher held the scroll close for a moment, then set it upon a stone before him. The word has been spoken, he said quietly. Now it must be written again, not with ink, but with lives. A hush fell over the crowd. Some wept openly, others bowed their heads. The teacher's eyes moved slowly across them all, faces he had healed, souls he had lifted, hearts he had restored. Blessed are you who keep these words, he said, for you will carry light into places yet untouched by dawn. He stepped back beneath the sycamore, looking upward through its golden leaves. The time will come when the world will forget this voice, he said, but the truth will not be silenced. For every generation, the Spirit will breathe upon new hearts, and they will speak again the same love. He closed his eyes and whispered a final prayer, so soft the crowd could barely hear it. Father, let what has been planted here bear fruit without end. The people remained still as he opened his eyes once more. He looked upon them not as a teacher to pupils, but as a shepherd watching his flock take their first steps toward the open field. Go now, he said gently, and live what you have heard. Feed the hungry, comfort the lost, forgive the unworthy. In doing so, you will find me. He reached down, picked up one of the fallen leaves and held it between his fingers. All things pass, he said, but the love of the Father endures forever. Do not cling to what fades, cling to what gives life. He released the leaf, letting it drift upon the wind. The people watched it twist and spin upward into the sun's fading light. When they turned back, the teacher was already walking away, his figure glowing softly in the last light of day. No one called out, no one dared. They simply watched until he was gone from sight, the sound of his footsteps fading into the hush of evening. The scroll remained upon the stone, the words of prophecy fulfilled, its edges fluttering gently in the breeze as though it too were breathing. The people began to move quietly, returning to their homes, their hearts heavy and full at once. They carried no scrolls, no tablets, only the echo of his words and the warmth of the truth he had left behind. Above them, the leaves continued to fall, drifting slowly to the earth, each one a silent witness to what had been spoken beneath their branches. And as the last light sank behind the hills, a single star appeared above the sycamore, burning brighter than all others. The teacher's voice still lingered in the wind, like a memory that would never fade. Love remains. Walk in it, and you will never walk in darkness. The star flickered once, steady and sure, as if heaven itself had bowed in agreement, its glow leading onward to the fulfillment that waited beyond the night. He walked into the fading light, the air carrying the hush of a world caught between day and night. The leaves whispered above him, gold and crimson, their fall as soft as breath. The teacher's steps were steady, slow, as if each one carried a goodbye and a beginning. Behind him, the path wound through the forest, strewn with the memories of every word he had spoken, every soul he had lifted. The disciples followed at a distance, silent, unwilling to break the fragile stillness that surrounded him. When he reached the clearing where it had all begun, the teacher stopped. The same tree stood there, its branches wide and heavy with the last of autumn's leaves. Beneath it lay the bench of stone where he had once sat reading to them, the place where his voice had first turned silence into meaning. He looked upon it with a faint smile, a light that carried both completion and peace. The disciples gathered slowly, their hearts heavy with the unspoken truth. They could feel it, the weight of finality in the air. "Master," Peter said quietly, "is this the end of our walk?" The teacher turned to him, eyes soft as the horizon. "The walk never ends," he said. "Only the road changes. You will take the path beyond this one, and there you will find me still, wherever love chooses to remain." The wind rose gently, scattering a wave of golden leaves around. "Them." The teacher raised his hand, catching one between his fingers. "Every season must yield," he said. "Summer gives way to fall, and fall surrenders to the stillness of winter. But life does not die, it rests. So it is with the heart that abides in truth." The disciples listened, the ache of parting tightening in their chests. John stepped forward, his eyes glimmering with unshed tears. "You have taught us much," he said, "but how will we walk without you?" The teacher smiled, the corners of his lips trembling with quiet love. "You will not walk without me," he said. "You will walk as me. Every time you forgive, I will speak. Every time you show mercy, I will move. Every time you choose peace when others demand war, I will live through you." His words carried like music over the rustling leaves. The forest itself seemed to listen. "Do not let sorrow be your master," he continued. "The Father has written eternity into the hearts of those who love. What you think is ending is only turning. The seed must fall before it blooms again." He stepped closer to them, one by one, placing his hand upon each shoulder. To Thomas, still uncertain, he said, "Faith is not knowing. It is walking through the unknown." To Andrew, weary but loyal, he said, "Strength is found not in what you lift, but in what you endure." To Peter, who trembled with grief, he whispered, "Feed my sheep. Feed them not with words, but with compassion." And then he looked to them all. "The teacher is gone when you stop listening," he said. "So keep listening, even in silence." A stillness followed, a sacred pause that seemed to stretch beyond time itself. Then, without another word, he lifted his eyes toward the sky. The last light of day washed over his face, a soft gold that seemed to come from within him as much as from above. The disciples watched, hearts caught between awe and sorrow. The forest glowed. The teacher's figure shimmered in the light until he seemed almost part of it, neither gone nor staying, but existing in both worlds. Then the light dimmed. The leaves settled. The teacher was no longer there. The disciples stood motionless. None spoke. The only sound was the slow drifting of leaves falling onto the earth, each one a whisper of the life he had left behind. It was John who moved first. He stepped forward to the stone bench and sat upon it, just as the teacher had done. He placed his hand upon the cold surface, and though the teacher was gone, warmth lingered there, faint but unmistakable. He closed his eyes. "He's not gone," he murmured. "He's in the air, in us." Peter knelt beside him, looking to the sky. "He said we'd find him in love," he whispered. "Then love will be our teacher now." The others gathered close. They spoke quietly of all he had taught, the meekness that became strength, the mercy that healed wounds, the faith that endured storms. And as they spoke, the sorrow in their hearts began to change. It did not fade. It transformed, becoming something steadier, deeper, like roots taking hold beneath winter soil. The forest darkened around them, but none felt lost. They had learned to walk by light unseen. The wind moved again, carrying the sound of distant water, and with it came peace. Real peace, the kind he had promised. It filled the clearing like dawn rising from within. John opened his eyes and looked at the others. "Let's go," he said softly. "There's work to do." They turned from the tree, from the place of parting, and began to walk back down the path. Behind them, the leaves continued to fall, slow, graceful, endless. The last of the sunlight caught them as they descended, each one glowing like a spark of gold before settling gently into the earth. Above the forest, the sky deepened into twilight, stars beginning to pierce the blue. The teacher's words lingered in the hearts of those who walked, living echoes that guided every step. "Love remains. Walk in it, and you will never walk in darkness." And as they disappeared beyond the hill, the forest grew still once more. The stone bench sat beneath the great tree, the old scroll resting upon it. The wind turned its pages lightly, as though invisible hands still read aloud to the world. The rustle of the leaves became a hymn, quiet and eternal, a melody that would never fade. For though the teacher had departed, his voice remained in every breath of creation, every act of grace, every heart that dared to be still among the autumn leaves. And so the season of stillness came to rest, not in silence, but in peace, the peace that never ends, the peace that whispers through time. "Be still, for he is near, always."